Barbara.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Lenox Public Schools School Committee meeting of January 30th, 2023. And our first order of business is the hearing of any public comment. Anybody raising a hand there? No. Okay, we'll move on then to the board report. School committee meeting minutes of our interview day 1.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the minutes of January 18th, 2023.
I'll second.
Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. School committee meeting minutes of day 2, January 19th.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the minutes of January 19th, 2023.
I'll second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting minutes of January 23rd, last week's regular meeting.
For consistency's sake, Mr. Chairman, I will move to approve the minutes of January 23rd, 2023.
I'll second.
Comments, edits? All in favor?
Aye.
Good to go.
Thank you.
Okay, some recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So welcome everyone tonight. It's good to see a nice full house here this evening. I'm going to keep my recognitions relatively short because we have 4 pretty thick presentations for you today. They're going to be departmental presentations on the budget. But I do want to start by just letting the committee know that with the support of Principal Ames, we have identified 2 students who will be stepping into roles as student reps for the balance of the school year. So we're excited to have them. I would expect they'll be at the next meeting, at least one of them will. So they are Adeline Schufelt, Addie Schufelt, for 9th grader, and Hutchinson Bray, who's an 11th grader, Hutch. I was able to connect with Hutch today, and I'll meet with Addie again, just to talk to them about their role on the committee. We're excited to have student voice here to both share things that are happening at the middle and high school, but also to have their voice represented on conversations and issues and discussions that we have. So really excited to have them. I did tell them that they would have sharp cutoffs at 8 a.m., 8 p.m. I should say, 8 p.m. So they can get home and do their homework and that sort of thing. So but looking forward to having them at the next meeting.
And we'll try to have a table space for them to sit right with us.
That'd be great.
May I just,
Whether that will work.
for sake of just sticking to the topic, interrupt you for 1 second. So when we started with this work last year, the conversation was that typically there'd be somebody from the school committee to be the liaison to meet with the students, answer questions, get some input periodically throughout the year. At that point, last year, when we did not have this up and running, I think we voted that I could do that. And obviously anyone else can do it. So I'm not certainly nominating myself, but I think we should designate who that will be so that we can coordinate and get the students ready to come to meetings. And there may also be some trainings coming up in spring that will have to be scheduled.
Yeah. Can't speak for everyone, but I'm certainly good with you.
Yeah.
Would be okay with that? I will add also that I believe if I have given it to Amy, if not, I filled it out to have my Corey clear too, which helps to make sure that if you're with students that you have that done, which I'll make sure that gets done. If it's not, I've had it before, but I'll renew it. Okay, thank you.
All right, so continuing on, I assume that probably in past years you've reported on COVID numbers pretty consistently, but I do appreciate Jen Dries and Kathleen Show updating our office on a weekly basis, and COVID numbers have really been almost non-existent. We're seeing 1 or 2 cases here and there. So just want to let everyone know that thus far we're in good shape. Attendance looks strong. Report from faculty every single day. So those are all good signs about where we are in the year. Wanted to send out a request for anyone who might be interested in serving on sort of a restarted wellness committee. Shannon Gagliardi, who's our director of food services, offered to sort of help coordinate that. And while I know we're halfway through the year, we thought it would be good to sort of reconvene, revisit the wellness policy, talk about those things. So looking for folks who from the administration and staff, community who might want to serve. If they're interested, they can just email our office, the main office, and we will talk about, I think, having a meeting. I think I plan to have a meeting once before February vacation, then a second time, and then bring to the committee sort of findings on where we are, so that you can all form and, the wellness committee in a more formal way in the coming year, with your incoming superintendent. I want to thank Amy Novitsky, my executive assistant, for supporting the business partners meeting this past week. We met with probably around 15 or so people, and it was great. At Kimball Farms, I want to thank Kimball Farms for hosting us and offering a great lunch. And it was really nice to connect with our business partners who are incredibly complimentary of our system and supportive of what we're doing. So they'll be engaging in a variety of ways, from Read Across America to the 8th grade career day, senior retreat, backpack work, and volunteering for a variety of activities like student interviews and things of that sort. So really impressive. I've actually not had a business partner group in my former district, so it was kind of refreshing to walk into a system where you had that already established.
Do we have a representative from each building who works with
We do.
and who are they?
Ashley Sherman at Morris.
Yeah, and
Tara.
Tara Romeo.
Yeah, the one at Kimball Farms is always a good one to go to because the lunch is always fantastic.
It was very good.
I've kind of missed that last 15 years.
And apparently they cater, or they provide food for the senior retreat. So they're awesome partners. We appreciate that. I want to send out a thanks to the Lee Public Schools for allowing us to use their gym last week. We're arm wrestling a little leak in our gym that's creating some turbulence in the gym. And I believe we're in good shape for tonight. There's a game happening, hopefully, as we speak. And we are working with roofers to get that repaired. So I thank Lee for allowing us to be in their space. The middle and high school, just from Dr. Ames's office, programs of studies have been shared out to the various classes. So they're about to launch in the throes of registering for courses for next year. So I know that's a big body of work that occurs in the middle and high school. So just want to encourage parents to engage in that process, talk to your children about what courses they're choosing, and we're excited to sort of move that along. Also, there's 8th grade parent night on is that March 2nd? Help me out on that.
No, that's this week.
This week, okay.
February is on February 2nd.
Okay, great. February 2nd. And that's it from 7 to 8 in the library. And that's again to sort of understand and sort of begin to have a dialogue around the transition from middle to high school and what the 9th grade experience will look like. So we appreciate the middle and high school staff doing that. Morris has a global play day. I saw that, and Brenda's update this week, and it looks like they're going to have a number of creative activities throughout the day on February 1st. So lots of stuff happening the first week of February. So she thanked local businesses and vendors, Target, Car Hardware, and the Alleghenies for donating, I think, supports and services and goods for those events. I guess the last thing I'll just mention real quickly is I understand you're closed on signing a contract or close to it with Dr. Collins. So with permission, I have begun to outreach to Dr. Collins to engage him in just things that are happening in the district, so he's aware and can begin to learn about things that we're talking about in admin meetings, things that we're discussing as part of the budget. And hopefully this will all help to sort of build this very smooth transition into the district in June. So, and if he has any questions or things he wants to pass along, I'll be sure to bring them to the committee. So lots of good stuff happening. So with that said, we have some thick presentations tonight, which get into the details of what we sort of provided an overview for you all at the last meeting. It is the substance of our agenda tonight. So I know we're going to review the elementary budget, the special education student services budget, the district admin and operations budget, and the IT budget as part of tonight. So I'm going to begin by inviting our principal of Morris, Brenda Kelly, to provide an overview on Morris.
Hey, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present the request for the FY 2024 school year. First, as always, I want to take a minute to thank my staff at Morris Elementary School for their dedication, support, and commitment to the families of the Lenox Public School System. And there are a few of them in the audience today, so I appreciate your support for being here for me. So the mission of Morris Elementary School is committed to providing a wide continuum of learning opportunities that value individuals, maximize both skills and knowledge, and enhance self-esteem and produce responsible lifelong learners. So we are the foundation for learning. The teachers and staff at Morris provide students with the fundamental academic skills, knowledge base, and socialization strategies to move on to middle and high school successfully. And there's the foundation of our outdoor classrooms that we built a few years ago. Next slide. Nice. Right. So this slide demonstrates a few achievements. Last year, fourth grade MCAS data demonstrates high growth and high achievement in both ELA and math. The bottom graph demonstrates student growth in ELA and math in second grade. And you can see how the skills have improved from first grade all the way to second grade. We have a comprehensive benchmarking system. A goal in our school improvement plan is to effectively facilitate small group differentiated instruction with meaningful connections for students. Classroom teachers, Title I interventionists, special education staff, and myself meet regularly to discuss student need. We adjust our practices, schedules, and interventions based on what each individual student needs to be successful. Excellence. We offer before and after school enrichment activities that 280 students participate throughout the year. 100% of our teachers are highly qualified. All classroom teachers have been employed at Morris for 3 or more years. For the past 2.5 years under my supervision, we have been able to grow together as a staff, such as learning diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. Again, part of our school improvement plan is each grade level will design 2 social justice lessons to implement in FY24. That is a work in progress. Next one. No, there's one more, but together. I feel very fortunate to be part of the Lenox community. We have a strong parent-teacher organization, community partnerships, and an active school council. The PTO has helped organize and support popular events like the Apple Squeeze, Books Before Bed, the Science and Technology Fair, the Book Fair, and the list goes on. Our community partners are always willing to volunteer at Morris or donate supplies for special activities. For example, Allegroni Construction donated 300 tiles for an activity. Synergex donated 345 t-shirts for a buddy activity. And Canyon Ranch has offered meeting space for staff development. So here is some data indicators and changes over the past year. The top is the current FY 2023 school year. We have a paraprofessional who helps manage and helps investigate behavior reports. And you can see thus far this year, we've had 23 behavioral reports with 15 of those bus reports, and 47 calls for assistance. That's like if a student is not able to self-regulate and is able to participate in education at the moment. That paraprofessional also helps support literacy within the younger grades. So you can go to my next slide, please.
All right, hold on just one second. We're going to switch screen sharing so that the audience at home can see.
Okay.
Tell me if that works. And this one. Without sharing, I think it's actually working out.
No,
No. Same thing.
it just says you've started screen sharing, but there's nothing up.
You're a little sure you can share yours, huh? You know, Brendan, in 25 years of doing these budgets, I never had faculty fill out this for me.
They're amazing.
We were there for you.
Military spirit.
Watching from home.
I mean, what's the right one, Brenda?
We're on, the next one.
We good now?
I'm not sure that they can see it still at home.
Should we ask somebody to just let us know? Let somebody, let
If I
Melissa
have a
know.
faculty member, if they want to text me, they can and I'll let you know. So if there's any faculty from Oregon, you can.
Oh, they can see now, they're saying.
Okay, okay, good.
Okay.
Deep breath.
All
Is
right.
this the right screen?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So, one of the requests I have for the FY 24 school year is an additional literacy support, supervision support person. Because currently we are not consistently providing the literacy support due to some behavioral situations within the school, we are not able to provide that consistent intervention. So at Morris, there is a priority to provide early intervention for students K-2. That graphic that you see in front of you is the current 3rd through 5th grade A reading benchmark. So that is just our winter benchmark data. And typically there's the MTSS, tier systems of support. So there's tier 1, which is the green, where you want 80 to 85% of your student population to be at. That's everybody's able to understand the core instruction. And tier 2 is typically 10 to 15% of student population where students need some targeted intervention. And tier 3 is typically 3 to 5%, and those students are generally students who may have individual education plans. So you can see that we have done a great job. In years past, we have 80% and higher in grades 3, 4, and 5 students meeting the reading expectations currently. Our students in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, we need some extra support. You will see in my next slide, if you could go to my next slide. Oh, or the slide before, I'm sorry, the slide before. If you could go back to the slide before. I'm sorry, Melissa. You will see our high needs group in first and second grade in kindergarten compared to last year is up quite a few students. So that is my first ask. And I also would like to mention, in the summer of 2021, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education sent notice to schools that pending approval, all schools will need to screen students kindergarten through second grade for dyslexia. Once that information came out, I met with my reading specialist and we actually put that process into place last year. So we have already been screening our students for dyslexia if they meet a certain criteria, but it is a mandate for next year. So just it is important to provide that early reading intervention. Okay, this slide, stay on the slide. Okay, slide 8. The second request is for curriculum supplies. Currently, we do not have a school-wide science program. The benefit of having a school-wide science program is that students in 5th grade take the Science MCAS test. They are tested on standards from 3rd through 5th grade, and the standards in the younger grades build the foundational skills. Amplify Science has a focus on evidence, reasoning, and modeling. And based on our MCAS data, our exceeding expectations is shrinking and are not meeting expectations is increasing. And you can see a few quotes from the kiddos. They're really enjoying the new science program. They're loving the hands-on experiments. 4th grade has assimilation that they do on the Chromebooks. They're really engaged in the science program. Due to our increase in enrollment, we need to purchase some additional ELA curriculums for the upcoming grades where we have a higher number of students. In our 3rd grade, we were able this year to purchase the new social studies textbook. The previous one was over 15 years old, but we only have a set for one class, so they have to share them. But based on our schedule is very consistent. So we provide interventions for both ELA and math. We teach science at the same time in grade levels. So being able to share the text has just become complicated. It would be really fantastic if each 3rd grade could have their own set of social studies books for next year. Next slide. I want to say thank you so much for approving our 2 full-time school adjustment counselors at Morris. They are working hard every day. The post-pandemic level of needs for some of our students has increased. Our students' social and emotional well-being is necessary in order for them to engage in learning. We've also seen an increase of our school adjustment counselors are also helping families with resources within the community. So we're in this slide just shows that 0.10% of one of my school adjustment counselors' salaries being moved over to the foundation budget.
So I'm going to ask Melissa just to do a quick sidebar on how these percentages fit together, because at the last meeting, when I gave you all a summary of how the 0.2 built together, I just want you to understand how you're going to see that tonight is broken out between 2 public departments.
Yes. So the 2 school adjustment counselors that we're calling school adjustment counselors at Morris, one is actually a guidance / adjustment counselor, and that is housed in the Morris Elementary budget. So that's why it's broken out here for this budget. The school adjustment counselors fall under student services, regardless of what building they're in. So the 2 that are school adjustment counselors, you will see in the student services budget in the next presentation.
But it's the same person, right?
It's 3 people.
Gotcha.
0.1 at Morris, 0.1 in SPED at Morris, special ed, and 1.1 at the 0.2 at the high school.
Thank you. It's just, Appreciate it.
Oh, next slide.
So this slide, you can see last year, our budget was, just under 2.8 million, and then now we're just over 2.9. I just also want to mention that curriculum renewal cycles are always ongoing. So this time next year, I will be speaking about the purchasing of a new math program because we're at the end of our curriculum renewal cycle for Go Math. So that is something that we will need to look for the FY25.
Brenda, I'm sorry, what does that mean? You're at the end of the curriculum cycle?
So
It's time to go back around and reevaluate?
So with Go Math, because we purchased 3 years of the materials, we were able to get a big discount. But in that time, instruction has changed, the pandemic has happened, and actually the company that purchased, the company who has Go Math has, I don't want to say discontinued it, but has updated the curriculum and it's now called Into Math. So your curriculum is constantly changing and it's just a cycle. And it would be great for the Lenox Public School District to get on a curriculum renewal cycle for like science, math, ELA, instead of just, I'm trying to get on a curriculum renewal cycle for elementary.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a related question. Were there curriculum investments that we did last year? Like, was that when we did the 4th and 5th grade?
Yes,
science?
we did it at the end of the FY22.
Yes,
And wasn't this in writing? The year before, or was it?
That never, because of the pandemic, that we didn't do, well, no, they did framing your thoughts.
Yeah.
That was when I first came,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
So I guess what I was wondering then about, so for instance, if last year we did 2 years of science curriculum, and then this year we do 2 years of science curriculum, that shouldn't be a budget increase, right? We would, in other words, if we're on a cycle of spending on some curriculum every year, it wouldn't, because we're not doing last year's by this year. So why does it get more expensive if we do something different? If that makes any sense.
For science, we are doing 2 grade levels at a time. When we go to math, it's going to be K to 5. So to keep the budget low, I only chose 2 grade levels.
Yes, sorry, I'm just saying if we did 4th and 5th grade science last year, and we do 2nd and 3rd grade science this year, then that shouldn't be a budget increase.
The extra increase here also is the extra ELA supplies for due to the increase and social studies.
the science curriculum purchase was not included in the budget. It was purchased at the end of last year, yes.
I see, okay,
So how do we pay for that?
End of year money.
All right, thank you.
out of the reserves,
Yeah,
okay. And so I guess then the follow-up question would be, next year, is your expectation that the math costs will be higher than what we're spending this year in science plus social studies, CLA?
Yes, because when you purchase, so like with Go Math, it's not only the curriculum in the books, but then you're buying the digital licensing for the math component online. So if you can get into when you do a curriculum renewal for purchasing for like when we did, when I first came, the 3 years of Go Math, they give you a large discount.
you get a large discount, but what it happens is the renewal cycle is every 3 years, so you see a bump. Unless you have that already built in over the years, you'll see a bump every 3 years or so.
Right, I guess what I'm thinking is just then in this year after that, every 3 years, we should see a dip.
You should see either a dip if there's no other requests, yes. But if something else comes up, it may either be level or a dip, but it wouldn't be a big increase.
Yeah.
So if you get on a curriculum renewal cycle, so let's say if we did science, we have 3 years of science, and then you do math, and then you have 3 years of math, and then you do ELA, and you have 3 years. By the time you're done with ELA, you're coming back around for science.
Right, sure, it's,
So then you,
Right, it seems like it would ideally, and I think this was your point about the cycle, we should figure out what it
Yes,
costs annually to maintain a curriculum. And if that's $60,000 a year, then we budget that even every year. Whereas it feels like every year there's a new incremental cost on top of what we've been spending, and yet the old costs never cycle.
It's similar to, if you don't mind, it's similar to technology. So we have worked to get on a technology renewal cycle. We were not on one prior. It was sort of what was needed when it was needed. So that will keep that budget fairly level every year, unless prices go crazy and, or we have a lot more kids. Same thing with curriculum. Without, we've been talking about a curriculum director. That person would be able to do exactly what you're saying and say, okay, this is what we need every year. This will get us through whatever requests or whatever is coming to expiration. It will get us through and the budget will remain level. That's the goal.
For all renewals on a 2-year cycle, that standard for renewal?
generally, yes. So you'll see, just comparing the numbers, that the expense increase under level service, and then my value added is there's a $62,000 between the level service to my value added, which is $117,805.
And what's the negative salary and level service?
So under the support salaries, we had an accounting move. We had 2 paraprofessionals from the grade 1 and 5 budget line move over to the high school with certain students. So that you'll see an increase on the student services side. It's not a one-to-one because there are other changes in there as well. With either a new employee who didn't receive as much vacation as one that retired, things like that. So it's not one-to-one, but that is the reason. And then we also did move a 0.3 that was shared between the 2 departments, who is a bus monitor for us. So she is now showing up as a special ed line item as a 0.3.
So as I said, we're always achieving excellence together. I have parents' permission tonight to show this little video of one of my students who is on the autism spectrum. What you are going to watch is the student for the first time participate in PE with his classmates. And on Friday, we had an assembly, Berkshire Theater Festival presented night before dawn, and the student was also able to be present for the entire assembly. So at Morris, we celebrate all of our accomplishments.
That's my cue.
See how it plays in this. If it doesn't, we'll go to the other side.
So
I see your point about the technology upgrade.
Yeah, there you go. We did there. We needed that minutes. Yeah.
Let's continue when you do this. We'll do this tomorrow.
I was too, because there were some other students not making the right choice and that's.
Yeah, that's your, when you were explaining this too.
That's your best elementary voice. You're not making the right choice.
Yeah, make it bigger either. Say sorry. No, this is great. I want it to play.
Well, thank you.
Well, Brendan, I'm gonna ask you to do this just for synthesis. Just tell us again what your value add asks are, just summarize.
So my value add asks are a part-time literacy supervision support person. Curriculum costs in the area of science, social studies, and ELA, and moving a portion of my school adjustment counselor / guidance person salary over to the foundation budget.
And that was 62,000.
And that's 62,000.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on any aspect of the current budget?
Yeah, I have one question for you. I didn't understand something. When you're showing the salaries there, couple slides back, you had the level funded section of the
Yeah.
budget, and you had 111,000 more expenditure there. I wasn't sure how that was level. It was going up.
And that, was it the professional salaries, I think the top line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the professional salaries, that's just rolling over existing staff, contractual obligations.
Okay.
So I guess the idea behind a level service budget is that you retain the same level of service individuals, people,
Right.
but their salaries go up, so the budget will increase. You at a level fund budget, you had the exact same budget
Right.
this year as last, so.
I only saw 60,000 in the sheet here, 61,391 for movements and contracts, so maybe there's more.
This is grade 5, kindergarten, pre-K.
Yes, you have to think of all of the departments, there's art, physics, specialists.
Yeah.
And that would include administration too, as a professional salary.
Brenda, one other question, just, I think you highlighted how some of the behavioral issues were driving some of the problems. Do you have a sense of where that's coming from, whether it's likely to be a permanent change at Morris, whether we think that'll, whether we see progress in it, whether other things, I mean, ultimately, I'd love to see us make any investments we need to solve it rather than have someone cover it.
So our younger student population, and I don't want to just say, post-pandemic, but we're seeing, pre-K or daycares where children weren't able to learn how to socialize. So, in our kindergarten class, I love them all, but we're struggling a little bit with our executive functioning skills. So we're spending a lot of time on structuring the classroom, reteaching behaviors. So that's where we're seeing some areas that could use some improvement. Also, we have some students who, as I said, their social emotional learning really needs to come first before they're ready to learn. And due to outside factors not being school, it unfortunately comes into school, and we're working with those students.
Right along that line, was there a change, or I don't recall the slide, it was between first and second grade at one point. Is this something that we could have would have had indications of at an earlier time within the school? In other words, is it like why first to second? Is it something we could have identified even earlier on?
Well, the behavior reports are not just first through second, it's K to 5. So let me just be.
There was a slide.
There was like K to 2, that was the high needs.
It was on one side.
Yep. So our high needs population, our interventionists, we are very fortunate to be able to offer small group instruction. And to be quite honest, with the increase in class size, when you start, I was a reading specialist, so when you have groups of 5 and 6 in front of you, you're not making impact as when you have a group of 3 students in front of you. So could we have prevented that? I mean, also, there's also the student, and we have to think about in literacy, their language development beforehand. And I'm not sure with the pandemic, it'll be a great dissertation for someone to do, not Mrs. Kelly, on where we see students' language skills.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking prevent, but more along the lines of we're catching it early enough.
We're trying, we do a great job at
Do we have
catching it
research?
early, and we want to continue catching it early.
I just have a question. I'm sorry.
Well, just that the high needs number there would have come from Desi. It wouldn't be a number you put together, it would be low income.
Right, our low
Yeah,
income
so
or
those-
EL students, like, for example, we
That's right.
have 3 first grade students who are level 1 for EL,
Right.
which means you need to, in the director of student service will speak to this, you need to see those students so often, and they came to us not even speaking English.
Right, so those numbers on the far right where it said high needs, were high needs based on how they reported to Desi.
So that goes to my point, I was gonna ask you about that, as I remember from earlier reports, we have an increased number of students who are English language learners and or, developing their ability to do academic work in English.
In our,
So that adds to a level of intervention as well, correct?
yes,
Yeah.
and our EL staff supports them, but also our Title I staff, and same with students who are on individual education plans. If there's somebody who is in need of some math support, they see the special education teacher as well as possibly sometimes the Title I staff as well. We really try to look at the individual need of the students and give them what they need.
And I just want to take a quick, the comment of dyslexia, and I personally haven't dealt with it, and I'm not an educator at your level, but I have a family member who was identified early and functions extremely well. And so I think, although sometimes he has to remind me that I'm expecting, we played a game the other night. But my point is that early intervention in dyslexia, I believe, as a non-expert, there's a lot of evidence at how much better the students do when they get older, once that's identified and they begin to develop the strategies and skills to learn, and they can typically learn more in a traditional setting once that is identified and worked on. Am I correct, Matt?
Yes.
Which is really wonderful.
K to 2, they say we're learning to read. From 3 to 5, we're reading to learn.
So, sorry, just before we move off of this, as I think about how the numbers work up, I mean, we've added, 30 or 40 choice students to Morris in the past year? And those, it's true that the formula established in 1994 is a terrible formula. On the other hand, we do get $5,000 per student. So in essence, we have an extra $200,000 coming into the system right now, directly attached to what is leading to higher needs at Morris. And it seems to me we should spend that money addressing the higher needs that are appearing at Morris, whereas by default, we just throw it into the budget as an offset to just mask increases generally. And I'm concerned that we're not, that will have the coverage that you described, but that we're sort of by default signing up for just a different state in Morris. And so I'm wondering if we took like $150,000 of school choice revenue and said we need to spend that at Morris to really address and resolve some of the problems that you're dealing with. How would we spend that?
Well, first off, definitely with interventionists who can help support the classroom curriculum. Looking at the social emotional needs and ensuring that there's the resources within the school and the community. I would love to say put on an addition, because I know that there's we did a drive for winter wear and I wanted to set up a little store, but where do I put the store? There's different ways to spend money on students without it being personnel to support their needs, if that makes sense.
I'll give you a couple answers too. Another early childhood pre-K program, pre-K classroom. So again, early intervention is unbelievably impactful. So the more kids you get in earlier, the better. Second would be out of school time programming, after school, vacations, and more summer programming. Those are again another way to provide intervention for kids, off hours, off days. So on that, I mean to.
No, that's quite all right. We're starting our after-school math tutoring for students in need when we come back from February vacation.
Just
I totally think we should have a third pre-K class. I don't think it addresses this problem because by definition, those would only be the resident population.
Sure.
But the other ones make sense. Anyway, I would just say as we go through the budget, we should keep in mind that what we're seeing is actually an extra $200,000 of spending somewhere that's not in Morris based on what's a very tight budget there, that's being picked up by the revenue generated by the increased burden at Morris. And I think it would make a lot more sense to spend an extra 150. I mean, I'm just thinking we shouldn't spend that. We don't need it, but we should figure out what we need and prioritize that investment over the other increases we'll be seeing elsewhere that are not tied to any actual increased need in the system.
And I just want to comment too, and I just want to just avoid, we're also on screen and media. I just want to avoid any suggestion or thought that we have direct information or evidence that a certain number that our needs are being, our money is being driven by choice, but our needs are not necessarily being driven by choice. We determine whether or not kids have need once they come into the school, and you're able to evaluate that. So our students' needs, A, that come up at different times in their developmental, and B, many can also be living in Lenox. And I just really worry, and I feel that there sometimes is a very harmful and negative idea of, oh, if we just don't have choice kids, we won't have needs. And we also have a diverse population of students, meaning talents, abilities, friendship, identities that enable us to have a robust curriculum. So you're probably going to hear me say that a lot because I do feel like that comes up, well, we just have no choice kids and we won't have any needs, and therefore, and that there's nothing could be further from the truth. And when you talk about too, like we take all kids as learners, and I really appreciate, and we move them forward in what they need and when they need it. And we're very fortunate to be a community that provides that kind of education. And so I just really want to make sure that nobody's thinking in terms of that. Yeah. And maybe I'm just saying the thing that comes up in the room, and I hope we all are at the same page on that.
Yeah, I just want a point of clarification. Enrollment went up at Morris, not only for school choice, but families moved into the Lenox community.
Right.
When I returned in January, we had 3 new students start. So it's great for the Lenox community. And as you just stated, children develop differently throughout their years. And sometimes some of them have a few challenges or just need a little extra support, and we're supporting all those students.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Ronnie. I just want to amplify it in one respect. I certainly don't intend to suggest that choice kids bring necessarily more different needs than resident kids. They're just kids. And so if Morris gets 10% bigger, we would expect 10% more needs off of a 2% budget increase. It doesn't quite add up. And if anything, it's an important moment to remember that the choice kids actually have the advantage of bringing revenue with them. That when the 3 resident kids join, there's no revenue attached to that. The choice kids bring the $5,000. So totally agree, and don't mean it as a judgment on choice at all, just as a description of what is a different reality in Morris than we would have seen last year.
We would see chapter 70 money for the resident kids eventually.
Sure, how much is that?
But the town
All $7.
has that to offset our budget, but we do eventually. There's a timeline, but
Yes.
and it's
It might be 25.
$25.
Yeah, I mean, I think the total revenue is, they're about, we're pretty close to our first total revenue, right? Joyce in chapter 70.
Yes,
No, yeah.
but we're in the $60 per additional student.
For the increment.
Holy much. That's next. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
All right, so we're
Thank you for all people who come to
Yes,
support. you.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks.
And you're welcome, by the way, you're welcome to stay all night. We expect to be here for a while, so if you have, other commitments. Although I'm sure that the other people would appreciate you still too.
So very happy to introduce Brian Kelly, as our Director of Student Services, and Brian has wide-ranging duties, like many directors do in small districts, wears a lot of hats. And so he's going to sort of run you through the summary of the various student services that are provided to students in Lenox, and then as Brenda did, make some requests for the coming fiscal year.
Thanks, Dr. Underwood. Thanks, everybody, tonight for having me here to bring you this details really of the student service budget. And I do really also want to thank my staff for in advance here. Some staff here in the audience with us, but also thank the staff. We have a really talented group of staff members that really bring a wide range of services to the students. We really have some diverse needs, and that'll sort of come up through the presentation. Just to give you the context where everything sits for student services, we have special education, which covers IEP services. That's students from pre-K to age 22. We deliver 504 services, ELL services, and I also have the duty of being the homeless coordinator for any students that actually come into the district or already here and identify as homeless. We have a responsibility also under the Kidney-Vento Act to provide services to those students as well. So this is just the range of students that we have, all the way from pre-K to age 22. This really spans a wide range of need. I just want to talk about that a little bit. On the left here, that's our pre-K students, our earliest learners. And that's an integrated preschool where we have right now 23 students. We can take 24. We have another student coming in February. Those students, we take all the special ed kids, have priority seats, and then the rest of the enrollment is filled by typical peers of Lenox residents. And they're learning, what Dr. Overwine was also sort of suggesting here is that the early intervention is really key for our students, and really the monitoring and screening of students. And then we screen the students before they enter. We really get first sort of looks at them while they're in our programming, and it helps us as they move throughout the grades in Lenox to be able to have that advantage of seeing them and having them here with us from sort of the get-go. Don't go in right yet. We provide most of our services in the general education environment. So many of the students that we have on IEPs are receiving those services right in their classrooms with either the special ed professionals or paraprofessional support. Some of those students also receive services outside the classroom for remediation, where they're getting academic support or reinforcement. And then some of our more challenging students with more significant needs. We have kids who are range from age 18 to 22 who we hang on to and are doing some great things in the STEP program, the transitional program. And those kids are learning life skills and they're learning social skills. They're going into the community, getting jobs. I had one student I really wanted to share a major accomplishment that's in that program. They were able to get her the skills to kind of fill out an application and apply for a job, a temporary job at Kohl's. And she got the job. And they're working on sort of like coaching her within that job, and then they fade those, that coaching eventually, and then we work with BCARC. Sometimes they take over some of that coaching with the student. And then they work on the surrounding life skills. The curriculum really becomes about, the life skills that they're working on, like transition, sort of the transportation, getting there, using the bus, budgeting. So a lot of those students who have more significant needs need that amount of sort of help and sort of transition to the next phase of adulthood. And so that we have them until the age 22, where then we finally make a plan to sort of fade that and sort of put them with usually developmental services afterwards. So some really great things going on there as well. As you can see, this is sort of the range of some of the activities that they're doing in the classroom. We have a lot of either peer mentors that come in and work with the students. We've had CADA come in and they do our projects with kids and have a curriculum that we work with. And you can see some of the students working on those there. Go to the next slide. This is just for reference. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is just really the laws around special ed, IDEA, and sort of really what governs, our work. So it's for reference here, but this really provides every child with a free and appropriate public education to the eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation, and ensures special education and related services to those children occur. So the most important thing to know there is that each student really is unique in how they come to us and the types of needs that they have. And so it's planning is always individualized, which comes, it's right in the word of individualized education plan for each student. So that plan or program service delivery will look different for each student that we have. This is just about our services and how that breaks down from ages 3 to 22. And that we have a team of individuals, work to create the plans for kids who are identified as having a disability in a certain category. And we meet those unique needs, like I said, and provide specific plans to help those students to be successful within the curriculum. Continue with the federal mandate, that's one of the least restrictive. So we always are trying to keep most students fully included. So many of our students are either getting modifications or their curriculum is adapted and modified for them to be either in the class or either pulled out for a very short amount of time for some remediation, so that they are getting the core curriculum like the rest of their peers. And then we do have a small number of students. We have 5 students right now, but that fluctuates from year to year. We might not be able to meet that service in Lenox, and if we end up having to send them out of the district to an approved, state approved school where they can get their services met. But I thought it would be helpful just to get also sort of some background context and some trends. So I gave you a number of years here to just sort of reference the students with disabilities. That's on the left-hand column, that's the number of students per the enrollment, and then that's the percentage. And we've hung out right around 10% for students with disabilities identified over a number of years. You can see there's a couple years where there was a dip. One year that was really low at 7, another year that was 9. I don't know if that was some pandemic stuff in the 20 to 21 year, but it's been pretty static at 10. And the next slide, I'll show you the state currently is about 19%. This is just so you know all of the different types of categories, which is a wide range of disability categories that are identified for us to go through when we do a eligibility determination. And so you'll see the numbers of at the top there of types of disabilities, and then I gave you a number of years, just sort of reference back to see what are the numbers of students in those categories, right? And so for all the kids that are on IEPs, you know, here's like the number of kids, for instance, on the left there in 2020, 2022, 2023. In the health category, there were 14. So like this year we have a total of, I think it was 81 or 82 kids total on IEPs. So this is sort of like a breakdown of how many of those kids are in each category. SLD refers to the specific learning disability category. That's students who have a specific learning disability in their reading, math, written language. Those were 19 in 22, 23. But you can see in the red, I indicated which ones were sort of trending on the upward. Students with autism in 22, 23 were at 14. And you can see way back, down at 13, 14, it was at 2. Students also with emotional disabilities has been on the rise. The other health impairments, the health category covers things like ADHD, anxiety, depression. It could be some other medical things, but the other health impairment category has also been increasing.
Brian, is health almost entirely mental health then?
It's not entirely. It's mostly. It's usually where anxiety will live or ADHD lives, executive, those types of things. But sometimes those, some of those may live there, and there could be an increase there, and some of those live on 504 plans.
And so this the universe is defined as everyone with an IEP.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is by the numbers right here as far as the kindergarten, what we're looking for. So I just sort of preface it with, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the specific ask. So as Brenda indicated, and then I think we were talking about a little bit in some of the discourse about early intervention, we're looking for an instructional paraprofessional, as we have 3 students currently in our pre-K moving to kindergarten in the 23-24 school year. All of those 3 students have high needs, and they're diagnosed on the autism spectrum disorder and are mainly nonverbal. They're making some strides. They have a lot of difficulty, behaviorally in the classroom, sort of self-management, being able to communicate with others, socialize. So there's their sort of pace at which they're learning is certainly delayed. We're really looking at trying to do some prevention and early intervention work. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. You can go to the next slide, Melissa. This is just to show you the sort of the pre-K layout. Again, just to talk to you about, we covered this earlier, but I want to include what we have in pre-K right now, the 2 pre-Ks. Go to the next one. This is just a slide just to show you really the advantage of working at the early intervention. As you can see, we have the most, for us, the control areas start at school. We don't have as much control in that early area where it says infant toddler, but you can see when the typical development and then delayed development, and we're trying to catch kids up. When we screen kids early, we try to get them in early and give them services. You can see as you keep going, right, like the gap there, the amount of effort and work that's going to have to happen to sort of collapse that, even as starting to get into 1st grade and then 2nd grade and beyond. So the key really is, to try to give as much support and resource to the kids at the earliest ages, so that we don't end up on the back end having the need grow, and then we're sort of really trying to patchwork things in and bring in other resources. We tend to be costly. We find other disorders developing. The gap gets wider. So it's always that game of, as I've done this before in Pittsfield, we're always trying to figure out what can you do now for the kids you have in front of you with big gaps, but how do you really start to remediate this so we don't have big gaps like this at the end? Sure. So we start not having that phenomenon eventually. This is a really small increase here, but this is really in the 504 domain. The coordinator stipends were new in the 2023 year. And then we have also a reduction, there's 0.20 reduction in EL salaries. One of those, the 0.2 is because the EL teacher is teaching a section of a language at LMHS. And this just sort of is showing you really how, a little bit more about 504. It's managed by the Office of Civil Rights. Here's a couple of the questions that always have to happen when you go through eligibility for 504, whether there's a physical or mental impairment, and it has to substantially limit a major life activity. And then the child has to be regarded as having a disability. And the number of 504 plans, just for statistical purposes, at LMHS, we have 51 students on 504s, and at Morris, there are currently 15, with a few in the evaluation process. This graphic representation over here just to show people really how all this stuff sits together. Is you have sort of all students, and all students should be getting, core curriculums, exposed to all the support and offerings that this school has. And then you have some students who have impairments. Some of those students may then have impairments that substantially limit and require more service and support, and that could be under 504. And then some kids who have the most significant needs might need that highest level of intervention under IEP services.
Brian, what's the nature of the 504 impairments that are all manifesting themselves after students get to the high school?
So that would probably, to me, it's a lot of times some of those other mental health disorders that typically are onset in adolescence. So if people aren't diagnosing accurately, because my previous profession before was in clinical social work, oftentimes kids are getting diagnosed earlier and earlier these days with things, but typically some mental health disorders are not diagnosable until later on into adolescence. Some also don't really manifest till then. So you don't get things like certain levels of depression that show up, or certain levels of anxiety or OCD or other things like that, eating disorders. Those things don't show up until later. So that would sort of kick that up, probably by middle school, high school. Question. Good. Yeah. Okay. This is just to talk about we discussed a little bit about the school adjustment counselors and salaries, and where these are. So just sort of taking some of that away, as ESSER starts to fade, and not going back into the budget. With 0.10 of that in LMHS is from the LMHS school adjustment counselor, and 0.2 from the Morris SAC, which is the total of $18,515.
Disconnected or connected?
Really good. I know.
Yeah, work that. I mean,
Like a commercial break. So I just want to talk a little bit in these next couple slides just about school adjustment counseling services. So this is here, there's a graphic and a pic here of our school adjustment counselor doing yoga outside at Morris. And just to get to the heart of everything that we know now, way more than we did in the past, that obviously kids have to feel socially and emotionally secure in order to do their best learning, right? So if we don't have kids really grounded and secure and feeling good that way, they're not getting anywhere in their academics, that sort of stalls out. This is just a quick shot of, this was from Jessica Minahan, graphic representation. She worked on the behavior code and has a BCBA presenting. And this is just a sort of a quick snapshot of like how that classroom sort of looks today for teachers, and just sort of like what students sort of look like in their classrooms, the different types of challenges and disability areas that they might face. So the SACs, I talked to them and got a lot of good information. And of course, I was a school adjustment counselor in my previous life. And so, people are often wondering what some of the school adjustment counselors they're doing. A lot of their job certainly is individual work with students. Those referrals may come from kids themselves at the older levels, especially. They may come from parents, families. They may come from the teachers. And so they're certainly doing a lot of individual work. They're doing group work with kids. They might be in classroom, consulting, collaborating with outside agencies and other professionals. Certainly doing case management for kids. And there's always some level of management of different crisis episodes. So this is just a little bit for people to reference about what teachers are saying. And I was happy to get a lot of teachers to actually send this information into us about what they say about how that's impacting their classroom and having SACs available to them. You can read that as well on your own. And they're seeing just about 20% or a little over 20% of students in the population.
Is that a typical?
I'd say so. It's from my estimation of what I used to see for kids, it seems pretty on par. So this is just sort of a summary again of where the FY23 budget was just around $2 million, and then that FY24 request is for 2.2, almost 2.3, with an increase of 170,176. And that's for the full-time support kindergarten and movement of the 0.3 adjustment counselor. That's really just the table that sort of breaks that out.
It's really the 45,000 is delta. I mean, the delta is 100, whatever, 100.
Yes.
The earlier side, that includes the
Right.
contractual.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And this is where you can see the support salary increase from Morris had the decrease, student services has the increase.
So some of it is a column move.
The support salaries, no, that is an increase. We had 2 paraprofessionals move from the Morris budget
Right.
to the student services.
I guess that's, gotcha, thank you.
This is just a quick number just to think about, like where I think we're really good and proud of the district and all the folks here. 16%, this is where we are, how much we spend in special ed for the entire budget, right? So we spend 16% of the entire district budget is spent on special education. And this is the breakdown, like this is sort of like the comparison to districts that DESE says that we are similar to. So as you can see, we do a really good job. Mount Greylock's right in the same area, and the state is at 22%. So it's kudos to us and how we manage a wide variety, of disabilities, challenges, with an excellent staff here at Lenox. Thank you.
It's a question time.
Thank you, Brian.
Can I ask you a question in your write-up?
Yeah.
So, is that appropriate?
Yeah.
You're laughing because I was gonna ask a question, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's fine, we're all here. Go ahead.
So, under, sure, what section this is, you talk about, and you touched on this in your presentation, which was transportation needs
Yes.
of students. And I'm reading here about that you're seeking van driver, for special education students and for homeless students. Could you just talk about that need a little bit more?
Yeah. It's been
A long road.
since July. We were working on it. I think we almost closed the deal 2 times. And the need is we're trying to offer, certainly transportation is one of our bigger costs. In the budget, we offset some of that with the grant money. So we're able to sort of use some of that money. Certainly some of that is in my budget. But we have students, we're splitting it to help defray the cost to kids who go to Taconic. We have some kids that, so that's not special ed, it's still a general ed support. And then we have some special ed kids that are close in the area that we could sort of take out of using D4, who's our normal transportation provider, and move that to us and help those kids get here. Which we're doing right now, and it's a huge thank you if they're watching, but I have some support staff who have really pitched in and have put themselves out there because they got their 7D license. But the paraprofessionals over at LMHS who have been actually picking up that run and doing that for us when it's really stretched them a lot, because one of them works in our STEP program, and that's hard on the teacher in there as well. And then the other students, we get homeless students who we do have to provide transportation if they cannot get here. So, I try to look for the best way to do it, the most cost efficient way to do it, but the best way, really safest way for a kid. How do you get them here, right? And it's hard when D4 is running on certain timetables to figure out how are you going to get students here who come to our district and end up in a homeless situation.
Have we been able to meet the need?
So I have been to one or two students. I have one student who's been using the van pretty consistently, I think. And one student, we had not been able to do that, but we were using sort of more of the public transportation and paying for the Charlie cars to do it. So we're always trying to find some way of making sure that we are responsible for doing that for those students. And you want it to be safe.
And we do have the van driver, bus driver salaries built into the student services budget, as well as the middle high school budget, because that's where the vocational has been sitting. But as Brian said, we haven't had any luck finding anyone to even come on board. We get close, and then there's always something that occurs where they don't actually join. D4 is experiencing a lot of the same issues. We've been creative, and the support staff that are helping us went out and got their 7D licenses so they can do that run for us, and that's been really so helpful. But it's only a small piece of the pie. We need to actually have someone here that can do some of the runs.
And if we were able to get it, we obviously we think about expanding that. We have the van, and we also I'm not sure if it's in working order right now. But we have the bus too, minibus. That takes a CDL, so that's sort of a different category. The person we almost secured had the CDL. But if we can do that, we can alleviate some costs too. It's and there's good ownership over being able to do that. I think it's been great being able to transport some of the students, personally, for our staff to personally be doing it.
Yeah, and D4 has helped out with some of the special ed runs at times, and they are doing the morning run for vocational.
And that's from where to come? That's from.
They pick the students up at the middle high school. Parents get them there, and then they transport to Taconic.
And there's room for all students who want to take advantage of that.
We have 9 or 10, I believe, that attend. Only 3 have requested transportation.
Just two quick comments. One is I appreciate the business managers who work really well across districts to also support transportation needs that are very fluid throughout the year in terms of picking up runs and helping each other out. So I really commend all the business managers that are working hard at this. The drivers are shortage across the county, probably across the state. And that's evidenced by, if you read the article about a week ago about Rob Putnam, who's a superintendent in Farmington River, driving a van on a daily basis. That gives you a sense of how desperate some folks are. So if anyone's watching and they want to be a driver, please contact my office tomorrow. We'll try to figure that out. So thank you. Good question.
Yeah. And we have some students who we have out of district and we're transporting, to those places too. And that's, that can be tricky, on the different schedules and, so it's a lot of juggling, and I appreciate it when you gets involved in that from my administrative assistant who's on the phone all the time with people and the cancellations and delays, and somebody's not here for transportation, and Melissa, it's a lot to juggle, so it chips in.
Thank you. My question was about going back to the pre-K. You had said, we have 23, we have capacity and potentially a student coming in for the 24. And this is only available to Lenox residents. It is not a choice program. Do you have a sense of how many? I know it's different every year that we turn away. Do we turn away students?
There's always, there's a wait list and then a prospective parent list. And actually we had some students. When I started in July, we had the wait list, which I was happy to say sort of, we went down the list because I think we did have some openings. And then there's some people who just, what happens is they put themselves on the wait list, but they're looking for other things too.
Yeah.
And so some of those families, were looking to do it, but then had other options, and went to do other options. So many of those people declined. And then I was down to the prospective parent list, which is really people who are saying, I'm interested at some point, my child turns of age possibly, or when it becomes available next. So they kind of, and again, my administrative assistant, Michelle's great about keeping real good tabs on all of that information and all the people in the order that happens, after we've gone through the lottery and filled it up. But I don't think we're turning away. I mean, I think we could, as Dr. Umphrey suggested, I think we could fill another class. I think it's just what happens is folks have a number of places to go and want to make sure they have options. So there are places that they would go, but we would probably pick them up.
And the classes, are they it's 3 and 4 year olds, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And are they in the same classroom or are they in separate classrooms? I just haven't been in the building in a little while. So I don't know. Two classes. So 3 year olds and 4 year olds together.
Yeah, mixed.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
It's mixed, and so they have, and we have the special ed students get primary. And so we always hold a few spots as well, in the early part, because you don't know who you're going to get for the referral throughout the year.
Yeah.
So when we start getting, like right now, I've gotten 2 to 3 from PDC, they're 2.5, and we have to start to get involved in the evaluation process in order to take them on, if they're going to qualify and come into the program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian, just a question about do we call them SACs or SACs?
School adjustment counselor.
School adjustment counselor. Particularly so it seems like we used to have one at the high school and 0.8 or 2.8s at the elementary school. And we used ESSER money to add a second full at the high school and move the 2 to full time at the elementary school. And now the conversion of 2.8s to 2 full times at the elementary school makes a lot of sense to me. The one at the high school, I guess I have 2 concerns about. One is we put them in ESSER money, presumably at the time because we thought it was going to be a temporary position. And it seems like we're sort of, what's the term, sliding rather than deciding into creating it as a permanent full-time position. And to the extent that that is the decision we're making, I'm very concerned that we're only moving 0.1 over, because presumably that's going to leave us with a lot more than 0.1 a year to move over in the future. So I guess stated as a question, I would like to understand, can you explain why we think we need twice as many school adjustment counselors at the high school as we used to have? And if we do, why we're not moving more of it over now?
Sure. I mean, Melissa might be able to talk to you about the moving the money part, like, as we try to do that in a way, it seems manageable, I think, but she might talk more about that with the need. I would say certainly has increased. So I try to include some statistics. There's certainly more statistics about, the challenges that students are having with mental health difficulties. And how time consuming that really is. And when you think about the development in the stages that kids are in middle school, is often much different than what's happening in high school. And certainly we see a jump in some of those significant mental health needs where kids are either hospitalized, not coming to school, have severe anxiety, severe depression. Kids who are contemplating suicide or have been hospitalized with problems related to that. And so it's never just a one and done deal, just doing the job. I did the job. So it's never you see the kid, it's either you're taking on some amount of that, just not only individually, but all the other ancillary stuff, like making phone calls to providers and getting releases and talking to families and talking to hospitals. So that accumulates lots of time per case. I mean, you could spend virtually an afternoon on a whole kid. And there are also just less, to be realistic about it, there are less mental health services available for people in the community, right? So for better or worse, I'm not saying it's necessarily why should schools necessarily up to all, take that all on, but I think we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to address some of that. There is a shortage of services available to kids, especially at least in an expedient fashion. People will be on a wait list for 4, 6 or more months for services. So often, I think our kids are feeling safe to go to people who are in house, who they know, who they can access right away during the school day, and hopefully remain there within the school day. And we wouldn't be having more kids leaving the day and saying, I can't come back to school because I don't have this place to go. So that's a bit of the answer. I mean, I could probably talk SAG stuff all evening, only because I did the job and I know how all inclusive it is, and how much I respect the folks doing that work.
Brian, if I could, it just probably the biggest advantage from my perspective is that having two allows one to work directly with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade team, for example, get to know those teachers, get to know that student group, really develop some skills and practices will work well for that age group. And the other SAC can focus on the higher grades, 9 through 12. It really is, there are different conversations, right? You're tackling different things. You're connecting with different agencies, different outside resources, as opposed to one person trying to make that connection with 7 different grade levels and trying to use the same tools with a 6th grader that they used with a 12th grader, which are two radically different challenges. So from my perspective,
that's a good point. I mean, if these were split out, the middle school was detached from the high school, it would easily have its own person. So there's no reason to think that just because it's within the same building that it shouldn't.
So I mean, it seems I don't doubt the incredible value that the SAC brings to the high school. I guess my two-part concern is, one, it seems fairly foreseeable that there will be a 0.4 request next year and a 0.5 request the following year. And if that's the case, we should really smooth that out and acknowledge what the plan is up front. And secondly, I worry about making this the school's responsibility. I mean, and I think you just alluded to that. There are any number of good medical services that young people in our community need, and it feels like we are enlisting the schools to take on an increasingly serious responsibility in that, which I think we should think about as a policy choice. It's a very different role than schools have traditionally played, and it's not clear to me that the school is the best equipped actor for that, or that it's the correct allocation of our resources.
What some people do, just a comment to that, what I've seen a lot of districts do, which I don't know that that's really the way to do it, is that they not only have what we have, but they also contract with a mental health provider to come in and do strictly counseling, right? But but that's just another ad, right? So I think we're trying to just keep it contained to the folks that we have to alleviate that, to really make our students feel safe in house. And for those people who know also the teachers the best, can consult and collaborate with them on working, how do you work with a student like this in my class, kind of thing, right? So it's more about that person in the milieu in the community as rather than being detached like a mental health provider, because it's not the same, right? When you go out doing that kind of work too, kid comes to me and they try to tell me I'm detached from the school. I don't know those teachers. I don't know. So I can work with that kid on isolated stuff outside, but to work with somebody inside and then collaborate with those professionals and teachers who have to see the kid, that's where your actual level of work is happening, to finesse. How do you work with a student with this type of situation, and how am I going to help him or her handle this stuff day to day, and making those teachers, feel also pretty secure and safe in that, right? There's a lot of value that the SAC adds for your staff members. I remember a lot of staff members coming to me as well for, what was happening in schools and how to handle that. So I'm not sure you really get away from that. Maybe I get your point about trying to figure out how do we smooth this out, to sort of.
Yeah, I mean, is it fair to say that we're providing medical services at this point? That's what.
It's medical services, but per se, but we're not diagnosing people in house and billing insurances.
But we're providing therapy and intervention, no question. And this is a pretty significant debate in the field right now. Who owns that? Is it the insurer? Is it the family? Is it the medical community?
Right.
The reality is there's a shortage of respected providers, and so I think the schools are bearing more burden in a lot of areas across the board. And this is one. I think there are some interesting models. The collaborative care model that's sort of like full service school, where you're bringing in clinics and your partners to provide service, and then you're creating, offset compensation arrangements with insurance companies and the insurers, so Mass Health or whatever. There's a model right now that's being piloted. I think there's going to be 3 districts in the county going to use it, which is telemedicine. Same kind of idea. We can't even get enough time with kids right now, and so how do you connect providers wherever they are, with the kids? So I think it probably warrants another conversation. It's a significant. I suspect that every district in Berkshire County, probably across the state, has added school adjustment counselors, right? In the last 2 years, a lot of it because the ESSER money came in, but these are positions they wanted to add for some time, and ESSER gave them that boost to do it. I would suspect no one's going back. And I would suspect if they have to go back, they'll cut other stuff before they do that.
Prior to ESSER, we added at Pittsfield, we easily added a lot of school adjustment counseling services, and that wasn't even with ESSER money. Just at that time, the need rising, and that was a way pre-pandemic,
sure.
Which exacerbated problems, right? I think literally that's exacerbated problems that were already existing. But I think, again, just to reiterate, the benefit of the in-house people, it's really about supporting the kids in classrooms, right? And so there's a connection between an adult provider in a school counseling role, which is not a mental health clinician. I'm seeing you for just basic therapy, like it's helping to finesse the work that happens for teachers to see kids and make education happen, right? Because we're in the business of education. So if we wanted to get down to it, right, it's how do we make sure kids are going to be successful and access a curriculum and do school. And this is the way I firmly feel that can happen the best, is that you have more people doing that work within those environments.
Similar in a lot of ways to the early intervention that you talked about.
Right.
Remove the SACs at what cost?
Right. Yeah.
Teachers having to send students out, kicking them out of class because they're not regulating, kids missing time, kids having problems at home. Like, when you're not dealing with the issue, like the concept is, I really, again, I object to the concept that a child is, this is your learning human being. You're coming in and now you're learning. This is your medical human being. This is your emotional human being. This is your psychosocial human being. I mean, we're dealing with whole children, whole people that come in, and particularly when we get to the middle and high school adolescents who really need a lot of skills to function. And we could play the back in my day game if we want. And we could also look at a society of people who've been broken because their needs were not being met when they were in school. I mean, maybe that is a whole other conversation to have, but even if we just want to be purely practical, kids who are bugging out at school are causing us to pay staff to have to take care of them, make sure they're getting educated. Maybe they can't figure out a way to regulate in school, so now we're going to send them to a special program. The special program may actually cause more, we could go on, right? So what we're really looking at, in my opinion, is that we take a human being who specializes in helping students to develop skills. You know, some students have a lot of skills coming up through elementary school, and they get to middle school and the train goes off the rails, and everybody, including the parents, who are at complete odds about what to do. They can't find a doctor. They're on a 3-month waiting list. They can't get, I mean, I could go on, right? Like, this is the reality of what's happening in our own community. You can open up a newspaper any given day, or talk to people, or go on Facebook any given day, and know that these resources are not available. So as these children suffer, there are added consequences. And if we just want to talk about dollars, which I don't ever just want to talk about, there's actual dollar consequence to that too. Because now we have a student that needs other services that we're not providing. So I feel like, just like we talk about preschool, and could we add another section? It could be spend another $100,000 on preschool or elementary school. I'm thinking the people that help students to be able to function in society is the absolute best dollar we're going to spend on anything if we're going to talk about dollars. So I really don't. I mean, what we know about trauma-informed education, what we know about special services, that students sometimes actually find the skills to work off of an IEP. They work their way into having better supports and being able to function. Students even who are identified on the autism spectrum disorder, again, learn functioning skills, sometimes through a school adjustment counselor or other interventions, that they actually come to a better functioning in school, in life, in family, in community. And then the other thing I heard you say, Brenda, is that your school adjustment counselors sometimes are helping with family supports, things that homeless families, things of families that are falling apart. There's trauma, there's poverty. So our school adjustment counselors, again, they're not only wearing their, okay, right now I'm providing a medical service, it's a whole community service. And when we help students and they're not bugging out, sorry, we don't have to spend a minute looking at the newspaper or the news to find situations where needs are not being met and people are being harmed. That's my soapbox, I'm done.
And on the financial end, with moving portions over from the ESSER grant, this has not been confirmed by any stretch, but I'm starting to hear rumors that the liquidation date for ESSER 3 will be pushed back. Nothing from the state yet, but I think we may be able to push that out a little bit longer than a 0.5 and a 0.4 increase if we do decide to maintain that position.
Yeah, but I had the same concern for Laura had. One, the 10% seemed like a small, okay, maybe it is gonna be pushed out next an extra year, maybe, but I had that same concern, maybe it should be 2, 20 or 30% rather than 10%. If we can do it,
If we can do it, right.
If that's the direction we want to go.
I apologize, but I'd like to ask this. It sort of is related to what we're talking about in the middle and high school. Also in your write-up, you talk about oversight of 504 plans, particularly in the middle and high school. And you say that they're becoming more challenging. Can you tell me what you mean by more challenging? Because to me, that kind of follows the flow of what we got. I mean, to me, more challenging means we're overwhelmed, we can't handle it, or it's increasing. I don't know which way it's going.
Yeah, it's probably the numbers. What's more challenging in the fact that we're seeing increased need on the mental health end, which usually falls in that sort of category under 504, right? So we're 504, a lot of times we'll pick up students who need those special accommodations for classrooms, which could be anxiety, could be ADHD, but there's an increase in a number of those types of disorders and difficulties that's increasing the need in 504.
And then, but it's tied to the oversight portion of it. So do we have the resources to properly oversee those?
Yeah, that's why we've added and want to continue with the stipended positions for the coordinators at this time. So I think, you know, one person at each building to coordinate the 504s is sufficient at this time. So thanks.
Any further questions for Brian? On any of the Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks for the good questions, really thoughtful, important questions. Randy, you up next?
Yeah, I can go next. Sure.
Okay. So we have Randy is going to give us an overview of technology. And we're getting there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe.
Take care.
Just ask. Okay, great. Sorry. Nobody wants to pay for your attention.
Really proud of you. Wow. Tell you. Thank you for having me, everybody. I really appreciate it. So real quick, I'm just gonna go over some things on technology that we're a very, very small department. Right now, we currently have myself and we have Lily Piera, who is our application and PD support specialist. So being such a small district with, you know, a lot of the needs that every other district has, it's a little difficult, but I think we're managing it very well. So here's some of the things that, you know, our department is really responsible for. So some of the technology and learning, the infrastructure, how everything works in technology, your network, your servers, your wiring, all that good stuff. And then all your data and compliance. How do you take that data and how do you make sure that it's secure and that we're in compliance with all the regulations that we have for school systems? And I'll wait for this slide to appear because I don't know why it's taking so long, but that's fine. So I did want to go through a lot of the technology department enhancements that we had this year. There are a long list that grows every day of things that we're actually accomplishing. I'm just going to focus on a couple of these things. Number one, in my opinion, and we talked about this last year, was the new wireless access points for all the pools. And we made a decision to purchase HP Aruba back in, I believe it was March of 2022. We ordered them in July of 2022. And we currently received 5 access points out of the 97 that we ordered. And that is all due to supply chain issues. So I am ready on the back end for these devices to be put in. All the wiring has already been done. As soon as these access points have arrived and they can be unboxed and they can be inventoried, tagged, and put into our system, we'll have a new wireless infrastructure. We currently do not. So we are hopeful that we'll get these in the next couple of months, but we've heard that they would be here in November of last year and then December and January. So we're still waiting on those. Another project that we're working on is the new fob card entry system for the schools. So we were old, you know, lock and key before, and we knew that in the technology age, keys get lost. People leave the district, they still have the keys. There wasn't really a great way to kind of keep track of all of those keys. And I think people still may have keys that they're not supposed to have. So by using an electronic fob system, which would also tie into what's called Active Directory, which is our authentication mechanism to authenticate users. As soon as someone leaves the district and they have a key card, I press one button to disable them, and now that card is no longer active in the system. So again, I'm going to talk about supply chain issues. The wiring, all the prefab work has been done for this particular project, but right now we are waiting on the main board to be put in. So once that main board gets put in, all that system can tie together, and then we can actually start to move forward with the key fobs. So
I would love to go through all of these things, but if anyone wants to talk to me more about some of these other items that we were able to accomplish this year, please, let me know either at the end of the presentation or later on. Please feel free to email me. But we can go over more of these things in detail if you'd like. One more thing I would like to stress too is we have camera systems all around the school. So we've got, I believe it's 63 cameras in the high school and the middle school, and we have about 32 cameras at the elementary school. Well, one of the big complaints was that the principal's office, the vice principal's office, and in the secretary's office right in front of her, there was no way to monitor those camera systems. So, they could have one in the main office, but like if there was a lockdown and the principal was stuck in his office, we would like to have a way where they could be in their office, locked down, and be able to view those. So we were able to purchase these, and they were installed over Christmas break. So that was a really good enhancement, I believe, that we made. Any questions on that while I wait 3 minutes for the next slide to look?
Just on 1G to 5G.
Yes, sir.
What can we do with 5G that we couldn't do with 1G?
So if you think about it this way, right? At your house now, the minimum that you usually would get is 1 gig from Spectrum. So that 1 gig service is running an entire district. Our utilization anywhere from about 50 to 80% when we weren't testing, but when we were testing, it started to kind of creep up a little bit more because you also not just have the testing. I mean, I honestly tried to say, okay, we're testing for MCAS, don't do anything else. Because I was afraid that people start going onto YouTube, they start using Canvas, they start using now PowerSchool because PowerSchool is online. I was afraid that we were going to hit our bandwidth and we were going to impact MCAS. We didn't last year, but this just kind of gets us on a path for increased bandwidth for the years to come with all the added applications that we're using too. So I just want to be prepared and be ready to go for that, for that next step. 1 gig is, again, it's great for your home network, but when you're starting to utilize like 2,500 devices at different times, we also have a guest network too, right? So not only is a child using their Chromebook, but they're also possibly on their phones doing whatever stuff. So it's like, we just want to be ready and prepared for that. Does that make sense?
Why do we allow students to connect their phones to the wireless network?
Some school systems don't. We have never had a policy that said that they can't.
And there's also some instructional technology that teachers use to get evaluation assessments. It's up to the teacher. I don't know what teachers are using it, but having students with their own device to do sometimes research or do some assessments like surveys. I can't think of all the little, you know what I'm talking about, little programs. There's a lot of programs out there that teachers use. Now, whether we as a district would say you can't or you can, or how many teachers are actually using it, the idea of having students use their own devices to participate in learning is part of a lot of.
I'm assuming, but not all students have a device, so we can't be using it for anything that's actually.
I thought also our policy is no cell phones in the classroom.
I know it's at Morris, definitely like that in the high school.
Parking at the door, I thought was the policy. In the high school. That could be, apparently I am. That may be the policy, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be up to the teachers, but I do see kids using their cell phones in class. So if there is a policy in place.
I jumped ahead.
No, it's okay.
I will take this question until shortly later.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So went over the current salaries real quick. I do have one request this year. So if y'all remember, I had a technician up until February of last year. We ended up, I tried to replace the technician back in February, but it was very difficult to find anyone with any kind of skills that we really needed. But we were also in the middle of a PowerSchool conversion. So we went from Redeker Student Information System into PowerSchool. That transition was probably the most difficult transition that I've ever been a part of. Because it's not just as simple as clicking a button and then everything is just imported into PowerSchool and you're off and running. You know, it's figuring out the GPAs, it's figuring out the rostering, it's figuring out all of these different things. And you implement it, but it's not like it's done and it's ready on day one. It's like, oh, wait, this doesn't work, or this GPA is not calculating properly. So it's been like it's been ongoing. I think we're really getting there. But don't forget, now you've got teachers that are utilizing it, you've got students that are utilizing it. So now you've also brought on all of those users that are now really wanting to use the system and being able to support them. So my rolling list, I've got about a 20-page list of all of the IT projects that I'm currently working on. And I can certainly share that with everybody. But what seems to happen is when I have these larger projects, and I'm also being the technician, it's very difficult for me to focus on any larger projects to move the district forward. So it's like, I'll be working on a project and then I'll get, 3 or 4 emails that a person needs this, or a kid needs a new Chromebook, or whatever the issue is for that particular day. And of course, I've been able to do it, but I don't think that I'm able to spend enough time on those bigger projects to try to move the district forward. So we're looking for a technician this year. That is the salary that we're looking to offer. But again, I don't know if I'm going to find anybody, but it's definitely something that I would like personally to try to, like I said, move the district forward.
Sorry, one other question on that. If we needed the full-time application and PD specialist for the PowerSchool deployment.
Wasn't just that, so it's a good question. That was kind of like my main focus in the beginning, but our teachers never had professional development. They've never had support on the applications that we're requiring them to use. All of the 20 applications that we might use at Morris or we might use in the high school, that was my ultimate goal for that person, not just for that PowerSchool or ASOP, which is our absence management system, but to really help the teachers move forward with technology in that way, where a technician wouldn't do that, right? They wouldn't really know applications so much. They could fix something real quick, but to help them with the application. So that was my goal of that person. And some people think that Lily, who we hired, is like fixing computers, and that's not her. That wasn't my initial intent, was for her to fix computers. That's not really her role. So is that the question? Okay, perfect. So software budget increases, and this just happens every year. All of these licenses that we have each year always go up. Like nothing ever stays the same. I wish when we had a license, it was like, okay, well, this is what we're going to pay for the whole entire, 5 or 6 years. That's not really the case when it comes to licensing. Businesses always will charge you more. So we do have an increase on our software licenses, which was increased by 15,824. And there's one request in here that I'm making, and I'm going to try to phrase this without being too geeky and techy. So we have servers, right, that are in our environment now that could be running Active Directory, any kind of Windows stuff, any server technology that we currently have. Well, right now, all of those services are running on single servers, right? So what that means is, if that single server goes down, power, any kind of failure, they're about 10 years old now, then we're down. And how long we're down for all depends on how quickly I could get a new server up and running, how quickly I could get the backup that we hope is working restored onto these machines. So these two items right here, this VMware and Pure Storage Array. VMware allows you to run servers in an environment where if one of your servers goes down and it's attached to the storage array, the other two servers will take over. So it's really kind of redundancy, but not really, because you always want to do maintenance on servers too, right? Well, right now I can't do maintenance without shutting services down for the district. So when you have this type of infrastructure, if a server goes down, it'll do it automatically. Or if you actually wanted to do maintenance, you take one down, you put the other servers on those 2 servers, and then you can boot that other server back up when it's back up. So that's one of my requests this year is to get that infrastructure in place. And the nice thing about this storage array, so like all the data is not sitting locally in the machine, it's sitting on this box, right? And it has an amazing technology to compress the data. So if you have like, let's just say it was 20 gigs worth of data, this machine can compress that down. So you're just requiring less data or less storage requirements. And it's also super fast. So that's another huge advantage to having something like this. The services are really fast and you can get to your data a lot quicker. New additions to the technology budget, these are just transfers. So Zoom, we've been paying about $11,000 a year for. I tried to get that down this year because I don't think we need an entire, all of the licenses that we currently have, right? Because the teachers can utilize Google Meet right now. They don't really need Zoom. But we are under a 3-year contract starting from when the pandemic hit. So I couldn't change the pricing this year because what I'm looking to do is really just have about 25 licenses for Zoom, have the school committee have licenses, have admin have licenses, and that's it. So we are looking to drop Zoom next budget cycle to that $5,000. But before, all of it came from a grant, which is now going to go into the technology budget. Same with Canvas. So Canvas was also grant funded for, I believe it was probably 2 years at the time. Yeah. And then I think last year we paid for it in a different way, right? With ESSER, did it come from that grant as well?
We paid for Zoom with ESSER last year. We paid for Canvas from the.
First remote learning initiative.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was just moved into the technology budget. So other program costs, we're up $92.75 from last year. Internet services was moved over from central admin into the technology budget. Well, Melissa was really trying to
An accounting function.
That's all it was. So like before, Morris might have a license here for software, and then the high school would have one. And it's like, Melissa had the idea of like, let's put it all together so it's just coming out of the same fund. So it makes it just easier for accounting purposes, really. And one other thing that I want to do is right now we have a CAD lab, which Matt Cote runs in the high school. Just a phenomenal program. If you guys ever had a chance to go in there and see the work that he's doing and the 3D printing and all this great stuff. Well, all of his machines are on the wireless network right now, and they're all desktops. So I'd much rather get them hardwired. So that's a small expense. It was like $5,700 to get that CAD lab wired. And here's the big hardware budget increases for just the capital appropriation. So Pure Storage, and you'll see it up here too, but that Pure Storage array, that's just for the maintenance each year, or each, I think it might be 3 years, I gotta check it out. But that's the cost of the actual Pure Storage array itself. I want to get Matt Cote new computers as well, because they're 7 years old. So I'm looking to upgrade those in his lab. And then each year, this is our renewal cycle that we're trying to do. So every 6th grade that comes in would receive new Chromebooks. And then 9th grade would also receive new Chromebooks. And that's the cost of them. So that's kind of our renewal cycle. We have had some damage with Chromebooks this year, not so much in the elementary school. And I think it's truly because they're on carts and they don't go home. But when we start seeing kids utilize the devices all the time and they're carrying it around with them, we've seen a lot of broken, dropped Chromebooks. And I've had some students, and it's amazing because the screen will be falling off the machine, and I'll say, "Hey, how did that happen?" "I don't know." And I'm like, "It just was in your bag and it just popped off." That usually doesn't happen, but but then I have some kids that are like so honest with me and they're so cute. And they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry it dropped, all this stuff." But that's a $400 machine, that we now have to find a way to replace. So we used to have carts in the high school, in middle school, but I like the one-to-one. I think students should have the ability to bring these devices home, but we do see damage to these. And last year when Tim was around, Tim Lee, he saw how many, there was some kids that were doing it, like breaking them quite a bit. And he's like, what kind of policy do we have? And I'm like, well, policy would be a great idea. I wish I had the time to spend on a policy to write for this. But he said, well, we'll give them the first one. And then if they damage a second one, then that's it. Like parents or somebody has to do something about it. And in the future, I'd like to have a policy that parents sign and say that if the student breaks the machine, it could be a $400, replacement or something. We need to find a way to recoup some of the money that we are spending on these. And it was interesting because I had a conversation with one of the guys from Lenovo, and he said the funny thing is where we see damage, if a Chromebook is on a cart, we see damage to the power adapters because kids are plugging them in and out all the time. Where we see damage on devices that go home are to the devices themselves being dropped. So it's like, 6 to 1, half dozen the other, which route do you take there? So long story, but that's our Chromebook renewal cycle that we.
Let me ask that question. So
Certainly.
kid comes in 6th grade and gets a Chromebook.
Yes, sir.
They have that from middle school all the way through.
So they would have that until 9th grade, which then we would then recycle again. Yeah. And if the Chromebooks were still in good shape, then we could utilize those for the elementary school as well. In the elementary school, we purchased about 100 last year. So they're pretty good. And again, they tend to last longer in the elementary school because they're just not taking them home. So here's our internet bandwidth increase. And we talked about this a little bit last year, which was the E-rate funding. So plain and simple, the federal government gives us 60% on our dollar, right? So if the internet costs $1,000 a month, we'd only be paying $400 a month. So that's what E-rate is. So last year, after E-rate, we were paying $2,053, and this year we would be paying $2,840 per month. So to go a 5 times increase, we're looking at a little over $800 a month to get those services up from that.
This is a question for Melissa. That service, is the town purchasing it for the town and you're reimbursing the town, or are we doing it?
No, that's ours.
Mhm.
So the town has a separate system. And I think they actually have broadband, perhaps, that because of that initiative in all of the Western Mass towns is connected, but I don't even think that the town hall utilizes that either. So they have their own. And we have ours for the schools and school department in town.
But was the question do they utilize it here?
It's town hall up there on the side or town.
Oh, that means our office.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up though, because that was like something in my prior district. I'm like, well, the town's using internet, we're using internet. Why can't we just kind of pull our money together and do that? But E-rate doesn't cover that. It has to be for school buildings.
And well, the library, the town
Main
library could
yeah.
take advantage of E-rate.
Yeah, which they might, I assume they would.
Not government.
Yeah. So this is a quick slide on the salary increases and what the software is. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure you might have some questions, so I'm sure to answer them for you.
clarifying question, it looks like all of the software and network upgrades you described are in here as level service. But I mean, whether we're talking about moving to a server array or quintupling our bandwidth, those feel like value add, no?
Is it because it's in capital? Is that part of it or?
No, the 33,000 of software, there could be an argument that which capitalized to the array, 9,206 should be in the value add. And that would drop that down to 23.
So there's nothing else here, everything that we talked about, all the stuff that we talked about is currently listed as level service.
Yes, except for the technician.
Yes.
That's a good point, though. There's some new stuff.
Yeah. All right.
Break that out, I think.
Yeah, and another quick thing is just, it seems like especially the Zoom should go in ESSER. We're trying to phase it out. And it was a pandemic expense to begin with. Is there any reason not to?
No, it can stay in ESSER. I guess that's a conversation we need to have, whether we will still continue post ESSER funding with Zoom.
Well, Rainey was saying we would just keep like the 25 licenses. So can we move just our intended permanent into operating and keep the stuff that we're stuck on the 3-year contract?
The 3-year contract is over.
This coming.
In the last year,
yeah.
right? So that all that could sit in ESSER and only the stuff we intend to keep
So,
permanently should be in operating.
When Randy's saying last year, he means this year.
Right, but I mean, we still have 2 years of ESSER. So my point is, anything that is part of that contract we signed that we don't want long term should be in ESSER. The thing that we see as our long term piece that we actually want should be in operating.
And that's the 5,000, the
Yeah.
long-term piece.
So in other words, in this current fiscal year, we're paying the last part of that Zoom.
Yes,
And so the 5,000 represents that smaller portion of Zoom contracts that will itself have a 3-year or whatever, but it's in a smaller license.
I probably won't sign a 3-year again.
Okay.
But yeah,
So that cost is just for the 20, that's just for the
Yes.
2 licenses.
right. Because of the webinar feature as well. And they haven't given me anything updated since I think it was November. So it could be even less than that, but I need to put a number in there just because I don't know what the cost is really going to be for that webinar feature. Because we might not even, before with the webinar feature was like 2,500 people. Like, I don't know how many people, are attending these and how many people we want to roll up to. 100%. Well, I don't know. I might have been some good school presentations. I don't know.
If it's really dynamic.
Correct.
You might get them to show up.
That's right.
I thought a license was like 300.
So, yeah, well, like I said, I'll take a look again and get you better, more updated pricing too.
Confused on what the long-term cost was.
Our school,
Yes, sir.
are you 100% done with that, or are you even building that out?
Here's the funny thing about Power to School. I feel like I'm here and then like everything is great and perfect and then something else comes up. But we had training in place. We had Power School on site for 3 days recently to figure out all the GPA calculations. And we also have about another 6 hours left of remote support with them. And we're actually going to have them, I think it's next week, to do our final grade storing for semester 2. So I feel confident today, but that doesn't mean I feel confident tomorrow.
We rephrase that, then. Have we purchased all of the modules and things we anticipate needing for them?
Yeah, there's actually some other modules that we could get to, but I don't want to add on anything, at this point. Like one of the things that I think would be great for this district is Power School Special Education. And Brian and I were starting to look into that because right now we have a separate database called eSped for that, where if a teacher could just log into Power School and then see their student with the IEP and or even any kind of, anything that the student has, that's really what we want. Right now, teachers don't have the access to eSped. Only the special ed teachers have access to eSped. So they're printing out IEPs and that could change. And now you're, okay, what are you going to do? Rip up that paper and put it back. So it's definitely something that's a module that I would love to look into for next year. Or
So
I
it's.
would just add that, my quick 30-day take is that we need to continue additional training. So we're fully utilizing the product that we bought. And that includes teachers and staff, but also rolling out a parent piece. That I think we're sort of holding back on in order to make sure this entire thing is stable. We've done some piloting with some parents, but I think there's more to be done there. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and all the students have access to it, so I think, I probably received about maybe 10 parents that contacted me directly that said, I really want to have access to this directly. And I kind of use them as my pilot, and everything seems to be fine with them. But we did roll through all 6th through 12th grade. Every student has access. So parents might say, hey, just give me the username and password so I can look into PowerSchool for you. So, that might be part of it. But I really would like them to have their own accounts because they can set up alerts. They can set up all of these things to say, okay, we had a situation in my previous district where a student was dropped off to school, mom went to work, the student left, right? So it went into PowerSchool, parent got an alert and called the school immediately saying, well, why is my kid not in school? I dropped him off at whatever time it was. And they're like, we haven't seen him. So it's like those kind of things that are really great that PowerSchool can offer that we definitely want to take advantage of with parents especially.
So Melissa, in the budget, I see here there's a $64,739 variance for software licenses. And the note next to it says PowerSchool new robocalls and content manager.
So, yes, so that 64,000 is not the net increase, the 33 is, but we're still in remember last year we were moving accounts into technology, so you're still seeing some of that where I'm putting it into the correct lines rather than a district-wide. We have it within technology for the elementary, within technology for the middle and high, because that's how we have to report the cost. So I'm trying to clean that up still.
So the 196 account number is?
The 6 is district-wide. So is the 67 in district-wide? That's for all of if it is in there, it's for all of the district-wide, such as PowerSchool, and a lot of the other things that we had up there.
Okay, all right.
But that's why you're seeing, it looks like a big increase, but it's really.
Well, I assume that's why you want to be sure when adding new onto it. Other question I have for you, Randy, was your VMware.
Yes, sir.
Maybe getting vSphere or something?
Yeah, exactly what I'm getting.
What servers are you planning on migrating to that?
So right now there are, I don't know where they were purchased from or how they got them the last time, but
Application ones.
what's that?
Application ones.
What services are running? Well, Active Directory, we've got file services running on them. Our current wireless server is running on them. Some old stuff is running on them as well, but I can certainly give you the detailed list of everything that's running on them right now. PowerSchool, no. PowerSchool's in the cloud. The old technology director really liked to have everything local. Well, for me, I'm kind of the opposite, where if there's a PowerSchool upgrade, I don't want to be the one responsible for upgrading PowerSchool and having things come down. So let them be responsible for the backups, let them be responsible for maintaining the servers. And now we don't have anything on site that could go down. Like if our internet went down and it was local, nobody could get to it. So that's my thing.
Okay.
Yeah, one good question. Morris teachers can run the PowerSchool and.
Oh, yeah.
So Morris is good.
From anywhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to make this isn't all a criticism you, Randy, because you're doing exactly what is your charter currently. But this seems like a good opportunity with a 28% budget increase in particular to talk about what we're actually getting for our technology in our district, particularly instructionally. I have certainly perceived a dramatic increase in reliance on sitting kids in front of screens in the classroom. In the high school, I think it's probably at least as prevalent, and that's before you get to everybody's personal devices. And while the causation is still sort of at like where the smoking research in this was in the 60s, the link to all of the mental health challenges is pretty close to irrefutable at this point. I think even just to pick on a very little example, the idea that it's great that if a high school student chooses not to go into the building, their parent immediately gets an alert on their phone, I would raise a great deal of skepticism about. But this seems to me to be just particularly pandemic induced changes for which there's no evidence. It's actually good for our students at incredible and quickly rising and entrenched expense and complexity. And so I wonder to what extent there's appetite within the committee for and with our district leadership for rethinking whether that's actually serving us very well.
So noted.
And if no one has any opinion on that, that's fine.
Yeah,
Um,
it's an important question.
I would be strongly inclined not to increase our technology budget at all until we have a clear sense of why we are doing it and that we believe it is actually beneficial to our students to do it.
We're talking about the entire, I'm sorry, the one moment I said I need 2 seconds. The entire budget or just the part about access points we were talking about earlier about student access?
All of it.
Yeah, I think you brought this point up last year, you know, what is technology doing, you know, good or bad? And coming from technology and having my own kids utilizing technology, I've certainly seen both sides, you know. My kid comes home, does all of his assignments online, goes into Canvas and does all of his work. But then I've seen the negative side to it too. But most of the negative side I've seen comes from him being on his phone, watching TikTok. And that's personally where I see the negative side effects to the technology. I don't know if it's just the fact that a Chromebook is open and the kid's going and doing a benchmark or utilizing the tools that we have available. But I would agree with you 100% on the screen time, at least when it comes to the phone. I see it. When I take my kid's phone away, I have no problems. When he has that thing in his hand, he's a different kid.
Yeah, well, and I think and I'm a lot more open to the use of Chromebooks by high school juniors and seniors. But if we think that equipping just surrounding kids with devices and increasingly telling them that's what they should be doing and that during indoor recess, they should find a laptop game to play, that's not connected to how they're going to engage with devices as they move to their preteen years. I think it's very clearly connected.
I can speak for the use of technology in the elementary school. So we do use our math has Go Math that we utilize. I'm sorry, but she's here in the room right now, but I know Ms. Bazinet uses the technology when she's differentiating her instruction. The students, she actually records herself giving her spelling test. They do it in small groups while she's providing instruction. It is an instructional aid. I would not like to see that instructional aid be taken from the use that we use for it in the elementary school. It is used at specific times and it's not abused that I see.
Do you have any evidence that it improves learning? I mean, just not any given teacher, I could use it in an extraordinary way. At the macro level, I see dramatic increases in the use of these technologies with no corresponding effect on output, with the exception that we know that students are getting much worse at writing, for instance. I don't mean in letters, I mean generally that there seems to be certainly no positive correlation between the increased reliance on technology and the actual outcomes we're getting from our schools.
If I could speak to, I think we have really highly strongly educated staff in the Lenox district that really you can trust to utilize the technology in an appropriate way. We really use it to differentiate our instruction, so that way we can target the different areas that we need for our students. So not just for the intervention piece, but also for the enrichment piece. So when you have grades, even within 16 kids, I have 6 subgroups of kids within that 16. So if I don't utilize some of that technology for differentiation, you might have kids sitting and waiting per se, or they can have things that's on their level, but I can be challenging them a little more and also be getting data from that information using that technology piece versus just giving a work. I'm not, we're not a worksheet school. We're a very hands-on school, but we're also a very data-driven school. So we're not going to use a tool unless we can provide data back from that and then guide our instruction based on that. So you can be sure that if we're using a program like MobiMax or Lexia, GoMath, it's because we're taking that data from that program and then using our small group instruction based on what we're getting from that data. So I just want to, those are pretty strong statements that were made. And at Morris, I know specifically, our staff works really hard and never has busy work. That's not who we are. And I think Lenox as a district, it's not who we are. So if you could trust the process, and I've known Randy a long time, and I think he believes in the staff and the power of technology, instructional technology. And it's a very powerful tool. And I'm able to teach my kids and really help them meet their goals because I have that technology piece included in. So I'm not on the board per se, but I'm here in support of the technology budget, if you can say. I mean, I'm a teacher here, and I'm so happy to be joining the Lenox district here. It's one of the best around, really. I'm just so happy to be part of it. But I think it's important to also see the big picture and to really trust your staff and trust your principals and the buildings of what we're doing and what we're using it for.
I would urge you, all of you, to go see Jess Bassinet's class. So I've never really seen anything like it.
Kids here, I have kids at the high school as well. Their teachers use it appropriately and well as well. So, and I encourage all of you too to come in and see us, not just me, all of us, because we have really amazing staff here. I know everybody's busy, but come in and see us and see it in action. It might change your viewpoint a little bit.
I had a question, Randy. Thank you, Jessica. I had a question relative to textbooks. Are there situations where our textbooks are totally online, or we have textbooks and?
I'm glad you brought that up, because in my prior districts, we went with a huge iPad initiative. And with that initiative, we were told that all of the textbooks would be online. And I don't think we ever really saw that. And I don't know if it's truly because the textbooks companies want to make as much money as they possibly can for new editions. And if you went to an electronic version, you might not need to buy all that stuff. But we're still buying books, and I don't really see a full curriculum online for having that. I don't know if anybody else has, but it doesn't seem to me that it's there. And I hear all the time that people don't like to really, read that way too.
Right.
So,
right. No, I understand that, but I had the impression, and this is probably a supplement to the textbook, that a parent could log in at home, a student could log in at home without having to take the textbook home and do their math homework or something.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing right now is you're seeing that a teacher will probably make a copy of a couple pages, upload that to Canvas, and then you can see it that way and do it there. But full textbooks, I haven't really seen that, because then you also have to enable all of those users to log in.
Right.
And if that's the case, does that take a license for that book every single time and allow that user to? So that was probably another issue.
I will say, and again, I'm not in the field every day. We have Dr. Ames here, not everybody else in the high school, but in the middle high school curriculum that I was using and doing lessons in, my instruction was 2015. So technology's changed. There's so much rich resources out there to be able to do primary source documents, to be able to log into the Smithsonian, to be able to log into, literally any archive in the, to be able to assist students in deep, thoughtful, critical learning, to be able to do some research. Now, is that what's happening in our classes every day? I don't know. But I do think that, accessing, is the evil that we don't want our kids on the internet, or is it that we really want to be clear that they're actually doing, clear learning? When I was getting my teaching instruction and doing my student teaching, one of the things I found interesting was that students all had these, but they didn't actually really know how to use them to enhance their executive function. They used them for the purposes that they use them. And so I was trying to support learning in ways where the students were actually using, and it sounds silly, but some students didn't really know how to keep track of their events or do calendaring or make sure that they get things done on time, and then I gotta say, so what's the opposite choice? Clear it all out and stick with what we have and don't enhance it, because that, and maybe that's a possibility. And certainly there's certain disciplines of learning that take all technology out, and they believe in that. I think we're gonna have a big discussion about that. We have to recognize that everything's gonna become obsolete. And you're already dealing, as I understand, with bringing up to date things that we hadn't updated, became obsolete, and created actually a bigger project, as I understand the history. So I'm not a huge techie. I'm gonna be really vulnerable and let you know that I'm job hunting online. It is a whole other world. And these kids are coming, and you said that, I feel differently about juniors and seniors, they're heading to college. But again, it's a building of skills. So I'd be happy to have the conversation about what role is technology doing in our schools, but I see teachers using really great lesson plans. We've got lesson plans coming from the Seventh Poverty Law Center. We have lessons coming from the Smithsonian. We have lessons coming from the, like documents that we can get in from archives and museums from almost anywhere that you can sit down and do a lesson on a topic and bring information in. Should it be done in a way that now the students are all sitting there at the computer all day? Absolutely not. But I think that there are interactive ways that students are learning. And so if we do no upgrades, we're just kind of hobbling along. And I sort of trust that the upgrades you're recommending are to actually help us move forward. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think, when we are talking town-wise, we have a proposal for a new fire truck, and we've saved 5 years. It's time for a new fire truck. We are in the process of spending $45 million on a wastewater treatment plant because we need water. We need, so I hope that we're not making this decision because there's an outward pressure saying we're spending too much money on things. I mean, I think that it was really well thought out. I know ultimately we'll deliberate and make a decision, but the idea of going to okay, we'll not do any of it seems like a pretty big conversation that we need.
Well, your point about educational outcomes, I'm fully on board with. I don't think there's the evidence of educational outcomes being enhanced by technology is. I'm not sure it's that strong. But even set that aside for a minute, the district as an operating entity, our back office and front office, they need infrastructure they need to be modernized. The parents, our student management stuff is all online. The world's going online, and we're trying to catch up.
And so just make 2 points. One on this question of what we need to spend to catch up. The budget is in comparison to a baseline that had investments in it. We have been increasing our spending and upgrading systems continuously every year. If we spend what we spent last year, we should be able to do about the same amount of upgrading that we did last year, not to mention that we just went through this huge power school upgrade. Which is why I partly asked about that's a very resource intensive process. Typically, after you do something like that, you would expect to come down off the cost of that, not to accelerate off the top of it. So I'm not suggesting that we not do things to improve our systems. I'm suggesting that it is typically and should be the nature of technology that the cost of technology actually comes down over time and allows you to do more with less. And instead, it seems like we are in a cycle where we continually need to spend more to do the same, which I think is a very dangerous place to be. I'm not, I think something like the FOB system is great. That was something we committed to last year and made total sense. But when it's just, we now need new and more expensive technology to run the same school system we're already running, that's where I start to wonder what the actual bang for the buck is. So that's one point I wanted to make. And then the second, I just want to come back to Ms. Bassinette's comment, because I really appreciate her point that the way teachers are using it in the classroom is carefully thought out and deserves our trust. And I think that's absolutely right. And that's why we have to make a distinction between practice in an individual classroom and policy of the district, and why it would never be our place to, I appreciate the opportunity to visit, but to all charge in and start interrogating whether those computers were being well used for particular intervention. That's obviously none of our business. At the level of the system, and whether we are deploying technology in a way that actually delivers better outcomes, which I think certainly, nationally there's not evidence for. I'd be very interested if we had evidence at Morris that we are actually getting better outcomes. The data that I've seen presented doesn't suggest it, but it's also incredibly noisy with COVID and so forth. But the set of commitments that we make as a district about what kind of district we are, what our philosophy toward learning is, what we see as the role of technology, how we want kids to grow up learning about the role of technology as sort of pervasive, always sort of in front of you versus a tool that has certain uses. And like, I love that we have technology class. I think starting with pre-K even, like having a time of the day when you go and learn how to use technology as a tool is obviously incredibly important. That's very different from saying our model of education is one that teaches kids that having a laptop in front of you is consistently enhancing. And so that's not a judgment on how a teacher is using a particular classroom. It is a very important question about the sort of portrait of a graduate in a sense at the end of the day. And over the last 3 years, because of COVID, we made a whole bunch of changes that we never thought about, never had a discussion about. Chromebooks were available in 2018. No one suggested we should all have Chromebooks and make that investment, and that was going to be a key resource. It is the forcing function of COVID that put these Chromebooks into the classroom. And of course, people found things to do with them when they were there. But we should be making an intentional choice that that's actually how we think we want our schools to look. And we haven't done that. We've just signed up for expanding the program accordingly. And that's where I think we need to look at it.
The Chromebooks were available in 2018, but there's been a push educationally for one student, one computer. From before that, I mean, it used to be the state would ask us what's our, how many computers do we have in the building and how many students do we have, and they would publish that as a, I don't know if that still is done, but that was something we used to have to report.
Well, in fact, we did have those conversations in the past about having iPads and everything on to them and laptops to take home, and had decided we didn't want, to your point, the forcing function of COVID, made that a moot point.
Yeah.
And then also the issue of equity, right? So let's just let the kids get their own computers, and then they can do computer work when they need to, and then they can not have computers in front of them when they're in class, which I would say, first of all, I don't think, again, to suggest that every student in every classroom is going to be sitting there with this in front of them. That's, if you go to the middle and high school, I don't think that's what you're going to see. I haven't been in classrooms since I was a substitute teacher a few years ago, but most of the instruction, if there's something on a whiteboard or students are engaged, they're not sitting in their classrooms for 7 periods a day with a computer in front of them. However, it is a tool that they're using for homework or throughout the day, or, whatever they might be doing. But one of the things we did discover is that the haves and have-nots, and some kids had access to computers and some did not. And those that do not have access to a computer that functions or their family knows how to use, don't have the ability to do instruction at home. And I'm not even talking about fully remote instruction. I'm talking about extra support after school, doing reports, following up. If you're out sick or your family had, so some of what we know is that COVID created issues. Some of it just peeled away the layers so that we could see them. So I think, again, it's like the idea of, well, should we have one-to-one or not? Maybe that ship has sailed. Maybe it hasn't. But unless we're going to literally go back to everything in instruction is, we're going to go to the card catalog at the library to research for a term paper, or we're going to, handwrite our papers. I mean, hey, I'm old enough. I had to sit there and type it with whiteout to get my paper turned in the morning when I stayed up all night to do it. But, you know, the reality is like, whether how much we invest in upgrading or changing or new software, I certainly understand as for debate. Your point about, will we invest in a certain amount, is it gonna grow? I mean, we're also dealing with inflationary costs in technology. I mean, the things that we're dealing with inflation and technology, I'm not the economist, I don't necessarily have the numbers in front of me, but when we talk about between supply chain and going to the store and buying, everything's costs more. So should we be getting the same level of technological support that we had in 2019 for the same dollars? That'd be nice, but I don't think any of these software companies are charging less. I don't think anybody's charging less. So I don't know. I mean, I've struggled a little bit with the idea that like we could go back to not having, you know, computers for students, because the students that don't have them are the ones that will suffer. Other families will find a way and every kid will have a computer.
I totally agree with that and would fully support a program that had a free Chromebook, no questions asked for any student who wanted or needed one to bring home and have to use for any work they want to do. I think that's a totally different question than the question of how the LPS uses them instructionally in the schools. So I don't see it as an equity issue at all, or at least to the extent it is, that's one that's very addressable and separate from our sort of model. And then the other thing I would just say is that technology is supposed to be inflationary. Like when you look at what costs rise and what costs fall, you've got costs for things like education shooting up over time, and costs for things like technology plummeting. And now, if you want to always be at the front of the curve and have the most advanced technology, that's certainly more expensive. But cost of network speed, storage, computing power, software over time, especially as we move to software as a service in a cloud, and like those all go down rapidly and dramatically, or at least should be. And so I think it's fair to wonder about a line that's moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I think we actually probably need to, that discussion can continue when we have deliberations in a few weeks, but are there any other questions for Randy? Do you have other presentations tonight?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. You guys take a break, right?
No, we're gonna muster through. So thanks, Randy. And I think it's really an interesting and important conversation. And I appreciate it being raised. I was in Pittsfield Pittsfield was one of the first, I think we were the first district to go 1-to-1. We did it with Apple, incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
We got it subsidized. And we believe that that computer should be a powerful tool to level the playing field and offer a set of resources to kids and teachers. And I continue to believe that technology used as a tool, effectively, as Jessica pointed out in the classroom, is a really important part. And I think it's an undeniable part of our contemporary educational system and classrooms. I mean, do I love it all? Absolutely not. I think we're all struggling with screen time and the impact of screen time. I don't see that in just the month I've been here and walking around and seeing kids in classrooms. I don't see kids buried in front of computers while the teacher is doing something separately in the classroom. And I think, as Jessica pointed out, it's used in a very effective way. Not perfectly, and I think that that's up to the principal and me, your superintendent, to evaluate, as they would the use of a textbook or the use of time and space in a classroom. So you raise a really important point. The other, whether you agree with it or not, the reality of our society is this is the world that our kids are moving into. I have kids who are on a college campus and live in residentially, and they're compelled to take online courses in the residential space. I think it seems absurd to me on some level to pay that kind of money to have my kid in their dorm room taking an online class, right? So And then, and I guess the last thing I'll say to you is we did support the remote transition as a county, and it was rough, right, at times, and we had to navigate that very carefully. And there were a lot of really tough stories that came out of that, with kidnapping. But I also heard some really good stories too, about how some kids were lit up by engaging with technology and engaging in an environment where they were not under the peer pressure of being in a classroom and were sort of able to sort of explore individually. So I think there are, it's an important question to have philosophically and I think to talk about. So I appreciate it being raised, and I wish I had an easy answer, but I don't. So thank you. So let's move on. We got this is going to push through, I think, admin and operations, right?
Yes.
Which are the shorter presentations. Thank you.
Yes.
At 9 o'clock.
Yes, this is.
Once we ask questions.
So we'll talk about central admin first, and then we'll go into operations and maintenance. That just gives an overview of the central administration staff, which you all know. We have a superintendent of schools, assistant superintendent for business and operations, 2 admin assistants, executive assistant to the superintendent, and accounting assistant for the business end. And then there's also a curriculum stipended position that is in the budget this year, and again, we have it in there next year. It is open at this point. So the 23 budget for central admin was $814,169. The 24 preliminary budget is up by 37,000 or to $851,644. So the total request, as I just said, is $851,644, which represents a 4.60 increase. This is where it's coming from. School committee administration. We are seeing the first number, when you see this, is the number in the program area. The second number is the increase. So we did have an increase in legal fees. We've seen a need for more support in that area, but we did also have a reduction in the cost for the policy review. We've had that in there for the last couple of years. So they sort of offset each other, and the increase for school committee administration is only $149 total. Administration salaries are a big part of that budget for central admin. We're showing an increase of $28,922. For contractual salary obligations, there's also the new superintendent salary is in there. It's not much higher than the previous year, but there are other items being added. So you'll see that increase in the line item. And I do have some money in reserve for the move expense and things of that nature. Professional development, we're seeing a slight increase there, $500. And that's because more of the professional organizations are now holding their PD in person. So for instance, I belong to NASBO, which is the school business officials. We had been remote for 2 years since the pandemic began, but now they are holding one on-site, one remote, one on-site, one remote. So we're seeing an increase in the cost for the travel to those. Other costs that come out of this particular budget are our payroll processing costs, our benefit services. We pay fees for the 403B services. Some of our insurances, our supplies for the office, and the advertising for positions. Help wanted advertising is really all we do out of our office. So that total is $49,350, which is showing a reduction of $2,740, and that's because within that grouping last year was the internet bandwidth cost was allocated to central administration. I've moved that into the technology budget, so that's why we're showing a decrease there. Transportation is part of this budget, and that includes the general ed transportation. We have an increase of $10,645. That includes some of the maintenance on the bus or the van, and our contractual increase with our transportation service provider D4. is at 2.5% for the second year of the 5-year contract. So that's the central administration. Before we move on to operations and maintenance, does anyone have any questions on that area? No. Operations and maintenance. So we have our custodial staff at both buildings. LMMHS has 6 total staff members. One is a 0.5 or 4.9. So they have 5.5 FTEs, but 6 people. And Morris is set up with a head custodian, just like the middle high, but with 3 additional custodial staff that work the evening. So they have 4 total, and LMMHS has 6 total staff. So the request for this program area is 1.131866, which is a 4.21% increase. And that's coming from salaries. We are going into in 24 year 2, another 3-year contract. This incorporates the raises, the longevity that was added, the vacation buyback that was added, some certain things that are monetary that have to be budgeted for. That's incorporated into that 24,000 increase for salary line.
And have people been using that?
So
Have custodians been using that?
that we won't know until the end of the year. They have until a certain date near the end of the year. I suspect that 2 will. They're typically.
That's right, because this is year 1 of it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
but I suspect we'll get maybe 2 yes. Custodial supplies. So operations and maintenance is broken out by custodial, and then we have equipment, then we have grounds, and then we have the building, and then we have utilities. So that's what you're going to see in all of these. So supplies and contracted services, a slight increase of 2,990. Our supplies are at 4,350, rubbish 19,740, and substitute expenses we held level at 5,000. There are some expenses for substitutes, but typically what happens is the staff that is working will work overtime to cover because there's difficulty in finding subs to come in. We do have 1 or 2 that we can utilize, and we do use them, but that's why that number is low at 5,000, because there is a coverage system that is in place. Equipment, maintenance, and supplies, a very small increase, $100, that is in supplies. Everything else was funded sufficiently, so we did not change the numbers. Grounds, projects, equipment, and again, substitute costs for grounds. That is seeing a reduction of 375. There are increases in some of the line items, but the substitute cost was, I believe, at 4, and I dropped it down to 3. So it's offsetting some of the other increases, and you're actually seeing a reduction of 375. Buildings. We have an increase of 2,937, and mostly this covers every part of the building, you know, windows, plumbing, doors, supplies for all of this, our security, system maintenance, our fire and water, alarms, all of that falls under the buildings. And that is seeing 2,937 increase. And some of the services were, I think, increased at about 4%. Utilities. This is where you're seeing the largest increase in this program area, except for the salaries. We have an electric contract that we are on the town's electric contract, and we go out to bid every 3 years. We're at this cycle is ending at the end of this year. So Chris is working on submitting. We have a gentleman who works with us from Lower Pioneer, and he will submit and request bids, and then we'll see where we are. But right now I have for electric about 5.8% built into the budget, and then some money in reserve just in case it really is a lot higher than I'm anticipating.
You just forecasted 5.7.
5.7 or 8, it's like 7 and some change. Yeah. And then there's an increase on heating costs at 5% anticipated, and other utilities were at 4%. So this gives you expenditure by program area for the custodians. You can see salaries is a little over half, and then utilities is almost a third. Everything else is smaller, but the maintenance of the building is the highest number aside from utilities and salaries. And I think this next slide is the one you're really gonna like. Okay, so
Move that thing, we can't move that, can we?
I don't think
There's nothing here. The slide is perfectly designed.
To cover up the punchline.
No, there's nothing under it. I mean, you can see it on the slide.
it's not under it.
Yeah.
So you were.
Thank you.
No, go. Okay, so Jake had this in the presentation last week. The numbers have changed. Berkshire Health Group met today and voted on the rate increase for health insurance, which is part of the benefits, the biggest part of the benefits, but the vote enacted a 1% increase beginning July 1. So that decreased our numbers quite a bit. We had 3.863, I think, in the original slide. We're now estimating 3.48468, which dropped the 12.99 increase to 6.40 increase. Now, the reason it was at the 12.99 initially is that is the information, the intel, like Jake likes to say, that we received from our board member on the board just a month ago. It will not be that, it'll be 1% for health insurance. And so these are the new numbers, which now at level service brings the increase to 3.71 with the 1% increase and not the higher, and 5.29 at the value added. So the 5.29 is almost 1.5 percentage points lower than last week's number. So it does help with the overall picture.
Yeah, dramatic. Yeah, great.
And
Just to make a point, it's really important to me and to Melissa to weave in the benefits cost as a total package for the school committee and for the town. And that's not done across the board. Often these things are separated out, and the superintendent will be pitching the operations budget and saying that's that. And so the town gets to deal with all the benefits stuff. But I think it was important that we included that. And so we're giving you really a true picture of what the total liability to the community is, which I think is the a more honest picture, a fair picture for the residents and for the towns, for the select board and finance committee on town side.
And all the presentations will be available at that website. You can get to them from the district website, governance, and then the budgets.
Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you for all that.
A lot. I really appreciate your patience.
Listen.
That's a very thorough presentation. We appreciate it.
Brian, great. It's been a long night. Thank you.
It was longer last year.
Yeah. That what it was.
Like the 13th then is to bring the middle high school, which will, I'm sure, be another set of comprehensive presentations by the department chair. And then we'll also bring you capital. So for example, the discussion that we just had on the Chromebooks, the renewal cycle actually fits into the capital budget, so you'll see it there. And I'm sure we can discuss that and however you want to approach that. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, this is a great one. And a lot to think about. And great news from the health. Consortium. Moving on, I don't know that we have an executive session. We put it on here in case we did. The situation right now where the superintendent's contract is, and I don't know if you got this follow-up from Bill or not, or?
No.
I just got it. Mike Long reached out to him from the Mass Association of School Superintendents as a service that they provide, so they're gonna look at it. And that was so probably like 12 more changes.
So the funniest thing about it is that every time it gets reviewed, something else gets changed, but it's not the new things that have been changed. It's something else that was in the text all along.
Yeah, like a word gets changed here because it makes it clearer.
It's always something.
Yeah.
So just so I can just time that for a second about process wise, so we had an executive session to talk about some of the things that were going to be in the contract that we're setting forward, some feedback. Now there'll be an additional round of feedback, so will we have another chance to hear about that before it's signed?
Depending on what.
Yeah, I think if MAS brings advises anything substantive, then we'll bring it back. If it's, as with, from our side, we've given him some wording change. If it's just clarifying stuff, I think I'd say we should just finish it. But yeah, any of the terms change.
Then we would have the 13th to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But we're moving forward, so that's good, and thank you.
So I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I will second the motion to adjourn.
I'm all about moving.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.